Okay, the Streets, Traffic, and Refuge Committee will come to order. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Moore.
Here.
Alderwoman Murphy.
Here.
Alderman Coder. Alderwoman Boyd. Alderman Bosley.
Here.
Alderwoman Martin.
Here.
Alderwoman Middlebrook.
Present. I'm here.
Alderman Boyd.
Present.
Alderwoman Boyd.
There you go. We got it.
You have 7 present, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. First board bill we're going to hear this morning is Board Bill 174, sponsored by Alderwoman Howard.
Okay. It's a stop sign.
Good morning, colleagues. I have before you, I hope it's before you, Board Bill 174, which legislates, provides an ordinance to place a stop sign at the intersection of Ridgewood and Wilcox. This is an intersection that is kind of problematic, and the neighbors have asked to have a stop sign placed there. And we all know we don't have enough stop signs. So I would ask for you to review this and pass it out of committee, if you deem so.
Okay.
Well,
We'll take questions from the committee at this time. Alderman Moore.
I don't have that board bill before me,
Here's 74.
but your explanation is great.
what St. Louis needs is another stop sign.
Right?
Any other comments or questions, Alderman Moore?
No, that's it.
Okay, Alderwoman Murphy.
No questions.
Alderman Boyd.
I don't mess with stop signs.
Alderman Bosley.
No questions.
Alderwoman Martin.
No questions.
What did you say? Wait a minute. Alderman Martin, did you say something before?
Oh, you're just trying to keep up with Alderman Vaccaro.
That's right.
Alderwoman Middlebrook.
No questions.
Okay. It's always hard to get a stop sign bill out of committee. But I'll entertain a motion to see what happens.
I move that we pass Board Bill 174 out of committee with a due pass recommendation.
Second.
It's been moved and second. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Moore.
Aye.
Alderwoman Murphy.
Aye.
Alderman Coder. Alderwoman Boyd.
Aye.
Alderman Bosley.
Aye.
Alderwoman Martin.
Aye.
Alderwoman Middlebrook.
Aye.
Chairman Boyd.
Aye.
Have 7 aye votes.
Okay, Board Bill 174 comes out of committee with due pass recommendation. Next board bill is Board Bill 165.
Thank you, colleagues.
You're welcome. 165, sponsored by Alderman Arnowitz.
No, 165 is Marlene Davis.
67, I'm sorry,
There you go.
167.
167.
Sponsored by Alderman Arnowitz.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Come before you today for Board Bill 167, which is a honorary street name, which will be named after Miss Estella Daly, who, as you know or don't know, just turned 100 this past year. And, you know, it's just something we just try to kind of honor someone that's lived in the neighborhood her whole life, been very active in there with the church and committees and everything else. I sent letters out to everybody in the 4100 block of Upton Court and got them all back signed that there was no problems with it. I think I'm just missing 2 households of getting anything back, but all of them came back favorable except one.
That was Estelle.
Okay, we'll take questions from members of the committee. Alderman Moore.
No question.
Alderwoman Murphy.
No questions. Good idea.
Alderwoman Boyd.
No questions.
Alderman Bosley.
No questions.
Alderwoman Martin.
No questions.
Alderwoman Middlebrook.
No questions.
Alderman, you did a good job collecting the signatures. I'm impressed.
Thank you. I learned that from you, Mr. Chairman.
Man, I could teach somebody something. Is that what I hear?
See there. But, like I said, I ask for your favorable consideration of passing this out today.
Okay. I'll entertain a motion on Board Bill 167.
I will move that we pass Board Bill 167 out of committee with a due pass recommendation.
It's been moved and second.
Previous roll?
Hearing no objection to previous roll, Board Bill 167 comes out of committee with a due pass recommendation.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Okay, we are going to pause and do a presentation real quick. We have some staff people here that need to get back out into the field and make our constituents happy. So we're gonna have a quick presentation on, talking a little bit about trash. Is there a representative, Kent, that's gonna kind of speak to us about trash? So what we're gonna do is talk about the new process that the street department and forestry have come up with, as well as hear from the trash task force of how it's working out in the field, the complaints, and how it turns into a camera at that location, and how many people we've actually issued summons to. So we have before us Mr. Kent Flake. Tell us who you are exactly and what you do for the city.
Good morning. My name is Kent Flake, Commissioner of Streets. Thank you for the opportunity to be here this morning. There's been small change, really, for what you guys should see on your guys' end on the district debris program out of forestry. This is mostly the illegal dumping cleanup is most of what this crew has. Their operators and about 10 truck drivers were moved over to streets in October. Since then, they've been kind of under the street division because a lot of reasons for that. We're trying to get the CSB streamlined because I don't know if anybody's ever called CSB to put in a illegal dumping complaint, but it's quite the interrogation because is it bulk? Is it illegal dumping? Is it in the alley? Is it on private property? There's 100 questions they ask you. I think literally like a dozen. So we're trying to streamline that down. That was one of the most hang-ups that CSB was receiving. Almost 50% of them were hanging up because it was just too many questions. It was driving citizens crazy. So we streamlined that part. We kind of got a real relationship with refuse bulk now. Their foreman and our supervisor are working hand in hand daily. We've got some real ground rules out there on what they should be picking up, what they shouldn't be picking up. Instead of bouncing around emails and everything else on every one of these addresses, we've got it down to either a phone call or an automatic reroute of a CSB to the right person to get it picked up. Many of you guys have probably seen that in the past. You put in a CSB for X address, ends up going to refuse. Well, then it gets shot back over to forestry, and then a week, 2 weeks later, then it might actually get picked up. So that's the big deal out of all this, is to streamline that process, get the complaints in, get them out of the right people, and get them picked up in a very timely manner. That's really the biggest change out of all this, is just, and forestry still managing the CSBs, the billing for private property, all of that. And as soon as they come into forestry, then they automatically shoot a work order to city streets or reroute the CSB to city streets. And then it automatically goes to the field. Typically, I think it's been about 4 or 5 days to completion lately. And before it was probably 14 days, something like that. And it also depends on how much it bounced around. If it went to the wrong person, then it sat there for 2 or 3 days, and then it got forwarded over to somebody else. The other deal is I've got a lot of loaders, a lot of bobcats, and a lot of other stuff involved in our street paving program and other things that we actually do. I think they had 8 loaders, I think, 3 of which are in very, very bad shape. So I can actually supplement those forces too, especially this time of year when we get out of street paving, usually beginning of November to probably middle or end of April. So I can actually supplement those a lot more. And I've also got a dozen of my own operators that on any given day, I can throw those guys out there to actually help pick up the debris. I know from a neighborhood meeting for Alderman Boyd about a month ago, probably the biggest complaint out of the entire meeting was district debris or illegal dumping. And LRA properties have been dumped on. And that's another thing we plan on expanding into more, is these LRA properties. A lot of these LRA properties, you can't even see them from the alleyway. The goal is to get that cleaned up, get the trees out of there. If there's a junk fence in there, get the junk fence out of there. Get anything we can out of there to open up lines of sight. 'Cause that's one of the best ways to stop illegal dumping is if I can actually see out my back window and see somebody dumping, they're probably not gonna do it. And a lot of these properties, you know, you get an old garage with where the garage door's missing, people love to dump in there because nobody's gonna see them do it. So that's our goal, is to start working on these mini LRA properties also, along with the CSBs and anything else we can do in order to we gotta get a grasp on this illegal dumping. You know, there's 4 or 5 wards probably that are horrible about it. When we picked this program up, it was, started to look through them, and, you know, there was probably a half dozen wards that had over 200 complaints, and those are just complaints. You know, that's not the guy who's not complaining. You know, 200 CSBs in one ward in 6 months for illegal dumping, that's a lot. I mean, I get 1,500 pothole complaints a year, so, and that's for the whole city, not in the ward, and we're getting 200 illegal dumping complaints in one ward. That's amazing in 6 months. Well, probably even less if you throw in some of the bulk, or probably even more if you start throwing the bulk complaints in there too. Typically bulk doesn't have too many complaints. It's the guy who puts the couch out the week after. And then of course they want to call and say, come pick my couch up. But bulk itself usually doesn't have too many problems. So we're just trying to put that in with our program, kind of blend and everything together and make it a little more efficient. I think that's really about it. We're working with a group in the city. I don't know who's aware of it or who's not aware of it. It's called Vacancy Stat. They're working on vacant properties, vacant blocks, that kind of stuff. So they've actually designated the worst 30 blocks, 35 blocks in the city. As far as most complained about, most LRA property, that actually have residential houses on them. And there's, I think, 2 other criteria. But the goal is to get in there where you actually do have a block with people living that actually care, and to do the best we can to get that thing cleaned up for the 3, 4, 5, half dozen houses on that block. So they actually have something to look at other than the garbage that's been dumped on them, or the LRA property that's been overgrown, or that kind of stuff. As far as the complaints go, those should go through CSB. Continue to go through CSB. I mean, that's the easiest and fastest way to get it out on the street. I mean, there's other things that do come up. If you see something or know of something that's completely blocking an alley or a street or whatever, you can, of course, forward that to myself, or I can put you in touch with an email to the guy who's in charge of that operation now. And you guys will be very familiar with him, I'm sure, by probably the next 2 to 3 months, just because of that kind of stuff. I kind of wanted him here today, but on the other hand, I kind of want him in the street cleaning up debris. So that's why he's not here with me. But I'll definitely get that email address to all of you. And that's pretty much the synopsis of it, I think.
Okay, Alan, would you mind coming up? So how does this impact forestry, this new process?
So forestry, well, we're still gonna, the CSBs will still come to forestry. We'll still send out an inspector to inspect it. If we need to send a letter of violation to a private owner, we'll send that letter out there. And then everything just goes straight to street department for cleanup.
Okay.
But our operations just move down the streets. I mean, if that's your question.
So a sidebar, will you be able to cut more grass now?
Yes, so we're out there, instead of, so we still have 25 utility workers that are in charge of weed control, are in weed control. We have full-time staff, there's 25, and then we bring in the larger staff in the season. So those crews who used to clean up, work with the debris team, now they'll just strictly cut grass. So they're out there cutting today. And if we get a little snow on the ground, then we'll shift gears and maybe we'll go prune some small street trees or something like that. That's kind of our plan.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and open up to questions from the committee. So Kent, you don't mind stepping back up for us? We're gonna start with Alderman Moore.
Step to the mic. My ward doesn't share in a lot of the things. I have a little problem with the street committee, especially, and I'm gonna get off the subject for a minute there, Mr. Chairman. I asked for LED lights for 50 streets, and I only have one LED light at the corner of each one of those streets I asked for. And I want to know why this is not in written form, something that I can read. And you guys don't have to have ordinances, do you? Because you've ruined Martin Luther King and turned it into a one lane, and we need to turn it back into a 4 lane because the businesses are suffering because everybody's going over to Page and making it out of a highway because we don't have bicycles in the 4th Ward. All the bikes we have is those green and yellow bikes that were stolen. We don't have people running down Martin Luther King, anxious to ride a bicycle down Martin Luther King. So if this is something we vote on, I would vote present because I'm not getting and we're not complaining. We don't complain in the 4th Ward. We request a service that our tax dollars is already paid for. So the word complain is not a good word to use. When people have paid their tax dollars, we want to be serviced by all. So I would think that this need to go into a ordinance form or some kind of writing where we can read it and sink our teeth into it. I know we're not voting on it, but I just think it's unfair for you guys to come in and just give me a spiel without having something for me to sink my teeth into and read and be able to tell my constituents what's going on. We don't like dumping. They're not dumping in the back of my ward. They're dumping on the front now. They used to go through the alley and dump. Now they're dumping in the front. And it is a horrific scene, dumping everywhere. My ward is city dump number 2. We're number 1 down by Broadway. I'm city dump number 2. Everybody come in there and dump. And we're looking forward to getting those cameras for the license plates to be able to catch these guys. But I don't like the way the streets department has been operating. And we need to be serviced more. I thank you.
So the LEDs, I'm not going to speak on those. That's a Deanna Vanker thing. I know we've been putting up LEDs like crazy for a while now. That money coming in I guess probably July. I'm not sure how that worked, but I know they're out there putting up about as many lights as they can physically put up per day. I'm not sure where Ward 4 is on that rotation. And yes, your ward is one of the biggest dumping grounds probably in the city. I've had 2 or 3 ride-throughs prior to October when we were first thinking about how we were going to approach this program. And, well, Ward 4, Ward 22, Ward 2 were the 3 prime suspects, you know, and that's one of the reasons that pushed for this. And we got to get away from just operating by complaints. Exactly. We got to get a little more proactive. We got to go in and hammer a neighborhood and get everything we possibly can picked up while we're there. And we got to get these areas opened up, like I said earlier, with the line of sight. So then maybe we can deter 1 or 2 or everybody, probably not everybody, from illegally dumping. And that works into what the trash task force I think is going to mention here shortly, because they're really getting into cameras. We've actually got a trash task force now it's got some teeth, and they're very, very active. We haven't seen anything like this, or I haven't seen anything like this in years. I think that mostly answered everything.
Kent, if you would help us out, would you have Deanna email the alderman from the 4th Ward and give him a timetable on the installation of the LED lights?
Absolutely,
And if you could have her CC me, that would be helpful.
absolutely.
Okay.
Martin Luther King is more important. Turn it back into a 4-lane. You never asked me to turn it into a 2-lane. You just did what you wanted to do. And we don't have bicycles coming down Martin Luther King. If I took a request from anybody in this room, nobody has ridden down Martin Luther King on a bicycle or will ride down Martin Luther King on a bicycle. So we don't need a bicycle lane. We need our street back. Thank you.
Okay, in addition to that, would you have, was that Deanna or is that you?
It's Deanna.
Okay, as
Or
far as,
it's actually MoDOT, I think, because it's MoDOT
okay, so
maintained road.
can you send the report, I mean, how we got to that point where we reduced the lanes so that there's a clear understanding of why the lanes were reduced? I mean, surely they did some kind of traffic study, I would guess, and what has been the impact of reducing those lanes since they implement that strategy?
Absolutely.
Okay. Anything else, Alderman Moore?
No, thank you.
Okay. How about Alderwoman Boyd?
No, I'm next.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. It's Alderwoman Murphy. I had a senior moment. I'm sorry.
As long as you didn't call me Alderwoman Howard like they do so often. But anyway, Kent, you mentioned that there's people going out and looking up for vacancies. Who's doing that? You know, determine what house is vacant, and how are they determining that? I know it's hard sometimes to tell, but.
Forestry does a list. Alan can probably talk about that a little more.
Okay.
Then there's a vacancy coalition, I believe.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. We don't know who that's made up of, or do we? I mean, I don't need names or anything. I'm just wondering who's doing that, and how do they know if it's vacant?
We have a list of all the vacancies that we've cut last year.
Okay.
So we're going through that list right now. And
Okay.
we send it to our inspectors, and we'll grab other staff, and we'll reinvestigate that. Okay, is it
Okay.
still vacant building? Is the building there? Is it gone? Did somebody move in? So
Okay.
reassess that, and
Okay.
that's happening right now as we speak.
Okay, good.
And it'll
That's-
probably
yeah,
take
that's
us
what I
a
wanted to
few
know.
months to
Okay.
get through that whole list.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
I think I heard in the question, who is this group? Who's
Yeah,
leading the group? And it
who's
looked
made
like
up of
Todd wanted to offer something. So Todd, you're more than happy to come and introduce yourself and.
Todd Walterman, Operations Director for Mayor Cruzen. If we could, maybe we'd have Patrick Brown, who's been leading the vacancy.
Okay.
And he's put
See,
this
that's
group
what I
together.
wanted. Okay.
And right now, we call it as pilot. So, I mean, it's kind of coming together where he should come here and probably present and show you what he has.
Okay.
If you want to add him to the agenda in the future.
Okay, so Patrick Brown is leading this initiative.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Vacancy,
Thanks.
good. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Now it's Alderwoman Boyd.
Thank you. Hello. How are you all doing?
Doing well.
Okay. Question. Ken, you said that they're changing how the CSB calls are being done?
That is correct.
Okay. Because the question that I have, and Todd, maybe you need to have CSB attend these meetings also, because that's the big issue. The citizens are calling CSB, and they're reporting dumping. Trash Task Force isn't getting the calls. And so they're giving it to Alan. And so then, well, I'm trying to find out the tweets and the emails, who gets those calls? Who gets that information? Because what I'm seeing is, it's a ball dropped with CSB. When they're doing what you all are, the residents are doing what you all are telling them to do. Call CSB, tell them the issue, and they'll give it to the right department. But that's not what's happening. And so that's my question. So how are we improving the CSB service calls?
So the way we're improving that now is, in the past, there was at least three different agencies that these were going to. Some of them were going to forestry, some of them were going to refuge, and then some of them were coming to streets if the debris was in the middle of the street or the alley. We're knocking out those three issues, and they're going essentially to one person now, which is Willie Young, who is labor supervisor for me. And then he's his inspector, well, it's not entirely true, because they go to forestry first. if they're forestry, because they have to bill. They look at the property, see if it's LRA, see if it's not LRA, that kind of stuff. And then all that stuff gets forwarded to Willie Young and Labor Soup for me. And then we run and check everyone, and then we automatically send it to the right people that it needs to be sent to. We're trying to get the phone call made to CSB down to 1 or 2 questions instead of a dozen questions. And there's also new ways that we report back on what we found through CSB. Before it was either just opened or closed. Once we get it, it's open. When we got done, it was pretty much work completed, whatever. Now, if there's a reason there's going to be delay, we have a method to put in. May not be there, will not be completed in time frame, but will be completed in 2 weeks or 7 days or whatever it would happen to be. So we can at least keep people a little more informed on what's going on once they open up a CSB. Because like I said, before it was either opened or closed. And I think that every committee, I think in the city's talked about that. And now we actually have a way to deal with those. But no, I mean, I've done it myself I haven't done it on the phone, but I've done it through the website. It's the same questions that the dispatcher or the CSB person is going to ask you. I mean, it's literally 12 questions, you know, it drives you crazy. And most citizens don't necessarily know where the right-of-way is. You know, if it's on a sidewalk, is that on my property? Is it not on my property? I don't know a lot of people don't know the answer to that.
Right.
So now it's just essentially going to a clearinghouse and getting sent to the crews. So it should get smoother. We're still working through some bugs on it, trying to figure out what we can get rid of. But the goal is to get rid of about 80% of it. So it's something it's a lot easier to figure out and a lot easier to do, a lot easier to complain, and a lot easier to get a resolution back to you.
Okay, so I know earlier in the year, we talked about refuge, and the question I asked was, I know when they pick up trash, they have to see these alleys in the condition they're in, and I asked about tablets. So you all had talked about a pilot. So did the pilot kick off? Do they have tablets? Is it certain areas that got the tablets, or?
I am not sure on the answer to that one.
Todd?
Just real quickly, what you have here is you have divisions that are speaking to different parts of the action.
Right.
And you're not getting the whole picture, I don't believe.
Right.
So, you know, Kent's not in charge of refuse, so he didn't know about that. He's not in charge of CSB. So we've got a lot of moving parts here. We know that we had a lot of hiccups in service over the past year from not being able to pick up contained trash in the dumpsters and having a hard time keeping them and mowing the grass in the parks. So there's been a big rebuilding of this thing that we're prepared to have in the spring, that we're going to look a lot different. We're going to be looking better. And it goes to CSB not having responses that say closed.
Right.
You know, people are really annoyed by that. It was almost like sticking your hand in their face. So we're working to eliminate that. We were fortunate to have somebody left refuse come back and help us, and she's made her movement through refuse and forestry and the building division. Those 3 divisions generate almost 80% of our work through the CSB. So they went and they've tried to revamp the wording, and we've tried to open up the wording at CSB so people get real words from the foreman on what's going on. Well, I'm going to tell you, being around 30 years, I was reluctant to have that foreman write what he really felt for fear of what it might say. But with social media and everything we have out there now, we got to give them the words of what we really see. You know, if you're out there looking for a dog, we got to say, hey, we didn't find the dog. This is what we found. You know, we need to come up with more words. So we're working that with CSB. We're welcome to bring our CSB staff in essence, and talk in more detail of individual questions.
Okay.
But I think you're going to see a new look at that coming out. It's all about streamlining. So what Kent was referring to, and I don't know if he got that across, was we have Willie Young, the new supervisor over there, and he's responsible for all uncontained trash in the city, period. Okay? So when we talk about trash, we talk about the contained trash that the guys get in the alleys and the carts, and that's one piece of business. But everything that's loose, whether it's laying in the edge of an alley, it's laying in a backyard, it's laying in the street, wherever it is, all falls to Mr. Young to pick up. We still count on forestry because they have the authority to cite for dumping and people not taking care of their property. So they bring out their professional, what do you call them, the inspectors and the arborists and that, and they look at this stuff and they write it up. And they have the legal ability to handle that. Once they process it, then it goes to Kent to do the grunt work. And his Willie Young guy has the loaders and the trucks, and they have deeper resources because they have all those orange trucks for snow. So forestry didn't have those. Forestry was trying to hobble by on a half a dozen trucks to haul this debris away. Kent, when he gets to a big problem, like I believe he's working up in your ward now on College Hills. What's
That's not me. That's me.
Oh, I'm sorry, wrong one. Yeah, okay.
Right,
I'm
you're
sorry.
the wrong person.
That's Stuya.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I'm sorry. But we're up in Middleton's ward.
I got
doing
enough
this-
of my own.
We
I don't
found
need
this
aid.
crazy little, it was a drug thing they were doing out of the woods. The woods were, there was, 25, 30 years of growth down there, and they were selling drugs out of the woods on this. It's about a third of an acre of a city block. And they're up there with bulldozers now, knocking the woods down, running them out. And there was actually houses in there we couldn't find. That LRA sent demo people to go knock down, and they couldn't find the house. So Kent's up there exposing those now. And that gets to this pilot, which we need we need Patrick Brown to speak more on where he's going with this whole
Right.
cleanup thing. But this is our first pilot block we're doing. And we've outlined these 30 blocks now, and they hit everybody's ward that has the junk. Moore's ward, you got some stuff, your ward, Jeffrey's ward, it hits them all. It's pretty neat. So that's a whole nother story. We could be here for hours. But we can get Patrick down there to speak about that. But I just want you to know, we're moving things around to make them work better. And I'm going to tell you, in the spring, it's going to look a lot different. Alan is going to do a whole lot more mowing. We're getting him 10 new tractors. That doesn't sound like squat, but these are tractors, so he can mow. He can speak to what he had, and he can speak to what he's going to have this spring. Alan, you need to let him know. This grass thing is going to be a whole lot different come the spring. We have contracts out for bid to get rid of one of these ugly cemeteries that he spends oodles of hours down there trying to maintain. We're going to contract that work out. So, and we're not getting any full-time jobs by contracting it out. Ideally, we take these part-time people and we get them up in your wards and get them out of the cemetery. But
So did the refuge start a pilot on the tablets? Because they were supposed to get the tablets.
all right, so yeah, so we are in that process of, what do you call the device you put in the truck and you got to mount them to? Cradle points. So you got to get this wiring harness put in and a point for the tablet to mount.
Okay.
So we're getting some of those put in now.
Okay.
IT has identified the tablet that we all need to use. Tablets are flopping out as little pilots in a lot of divisions now. We're trying to get Allen's inspectors out there by spring with them. So it'll all be more instant. We won't lose that day of paperwork every time somebody touches it. We lose a day. So we're getting there. We won't be 100% by spring, but we're going to be messing it up by spring. We're going to have people touching tablets by spring, doing things, and we're going to find our problems. And it's going to get a whole lot better.
Okay.
It can't do anything but get better.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry I wasn't.
That's all right. You was on the road there, Todd. That's fine.
Pull the grass if you got a minute. I mean,
That's fine. But Ken, I just want to thank you all because the task force and I have been working with a block over in our ward, and it's been really stressful for the task force and myself and the residents. And so you all did a superb job over there. I've never seen it that clean unless we cleaned it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. That's all I have, Chair.
Okay, Alderman Bosley.
Good morning. How are you this morning?
I'm doing pretty good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate you all being here. I know that you all know that your job isn't easy, especially taking in 80% of what the city considers our more physical issues. So I certainly appreciate the time and effort that you all put in. So I did have a few questions initially, but you all have done a good job answering those thus far without having to ask those questions. So the questions that weren't answered, though, and there might not be, once again, because it isn't anything physically kind of in front of us, it might be something that already exists, but In terms of the city's dwindling population and, you know, our vacancy issue as of now has been a product of that, we don't really have an idea of where we'll be 5 or 10 years from now as far as population goes. So is there a plan that outlines how we will be operating in the event where we continue to dwindle in population? So we won't have these same issues that we're dealing with now in the future. I think a lot of this stems from overgrowth. A lot of these properties haven't been touched in 10 or 15 years. And those small weeds, of course, you know, turn into trees. Then you got trash that hasn't been touched in 4 or 5 years. People don't want to walk up on it. You don't know if there are holes in the ground. You know, all of those issues are, I think, things that will continue if we just take care of the ones that exist right now, because other vacancies will pop up. You know, what are we doing to be a little bit more preventative so when a house does go vacant and let's say it goes to LRA off a sheriff's auction, you know, are we setting up, let's say, crews or initiatives within these departments to make sure that those buildings and properties are maintained from that point so they won't be where they are now 10 years down the line where we're trying to cut down entire forests? Because I got deers in my ward living right next door to homeowners. Like, I got people text me right now about coyotes. I haven't seen them, but it's super, super interesting. And I just think we really need to be looking at being preventative at the same time while we're addressing the issues where they are, so we can make sure that, you know, we're not kicking ourselves in the butt again about the same things. So is that?
Well, I think we probably just relocated that coyote, I think Tuesday.
That's what's up. Thank you.
But the vacancy collaborative, with Patrick Brown, that's why it's a collaborative. They've got everybody, pretty much everybody you can think of involved. Everybody from health, NISs, everybody. And what they're doing is they're really trying to go door to door, like this College Hills block we're working on currently. They went door to door on that. We did another neighborhood 3-4 weeks ago. And they went door to door. They're pushing the moto programs. They're pushing anything they can out there onto the street, trying to get people aware of what they can. They're also trying to look proactively. Those guys have numbers. They've got more numbers and more stats, more this, more that, because it's partially LRA, it's partially the mayor's office, partially a lot of people. There's more numbers, more stats, more stuff. Not like I said, it's probably a 2-hour conversation with those guys. But they're really digging into that, and they're trying to really keep those properties from going to LRA. I think Laura Costello just told with LRA, just mentioned the other day, I don't remember what the number was, but it was almost half as many houses went to LRA, I think, in the last year than their average. And that's a big step. I mean, if that number keeps being a couple hundred properties every year, you know, it just becomes a huge pile of property. But if you can get it down to where you cut that, where only 50% of the properties on average are going to LRA, maybe we can actually manage it then. But that vacancy collaborative, like I said, they're doing a lot of really cool things. There are a bunch of people involved in that. There's actually 2 groups of them. There's kind of a hands-on guys like Alan and I, and then they've got the numbers gurus, and then they also have some outside money and sources to throw into it also. So I would definitely suggest having Patrick Brown in here, or at least 2A committee of some sort, to talk about the vacancy collaborative.
Okay, certainly appreciate that. So the foremen that are out generally on the jobs handling the actual work, is it within their job description to report, and I think this question was asked, but I just want to get clarity really quickly, to report debris that they see in alleys or overturned dumpsters or, you know, let's say, for instance, even with forestry, when you have foremen who are out there cutting particular properties that are on the list, but next door they see one that is in horrible shape also that they generally won't touch because it's not on the list, and they might have to go halfway across town to finish up something that is on the list. What is their normal protocol in relaying the message back to the departments that this needs to be done also. I drove through an alley, this dumpster was turned over. Of course, the dump trucks don't pick up overturned dumpsters, right? But someone has to report that, and you all go through the alleys almost, at least once a week. So sometimes residents might not catch that. Some residents will catch it and will think to themselves, the city will take care of it, and which I think we should. So what does that normal protocol look like as far as from the foreman being able to relay those messages in terms of what it is that needs to be done versus what they're doing?
Yeah, we have not done a great job of that, as we all probably have seen. Refuse is typically in alleys 3 times a week. A lot of their drivers will mark things down as they see it. A lot of those were never making it to a system in order for Alan to go work on, myself to go work on, or somebody else. That's part of what these cradle point and these tablets are going to do. Is it's going to give them an easy access to be able to report something. I mean, a lot of these neighborhoods, the guy would never make it 2 blocks because he'd have 4 notebook pages of stuff filled up, depending on the neighborhood. So the goal is, with that'll all tie in with this cradle point stuff and the tablets being in refuse trucks. From my side, with district debris or illegal dumping or whatever we're calling it, here in the next probably 30 days, the goal is to get away from going and doing house 1 and house 10, but to go through every one of those. If house 1 through 7 are LRAs, let's get everything cleaned up while we're there. It's a lot more efficient for us. So I'm not driving all over town doing a shotgun approach. Instead, I can at least go spend some time on that block. Today, I can probably get the entire block cleaned up. And in theory, hopefully I don't have another complaint from there for a while, because we did a good job. We opened up lines of sight. I mean, that's really the key. Is if I just pick up a pile of junk, there's gonna be another pile back there tomorrow. So I gotta go in with a bigger scope and hopefully get things cleaned up where you all can see your alleyway, see your street, and then you start feeling a little safer too.
So with all respects, I mean, any disrespect, but so we always come up with these initiatives, and just being realistic, you all aren't out there physically doing the work. So the individuals who don't always do it efficiently. They will come out there and clean an alley but leave a bunch of other stuff and say, oh, that's a whole nother department. Or they'll cut the grass and have trash cut up with it and have it all over the lot, right? Or they'll clean up one part of the alley and don't clean up the other part of the alley. So even with, us saying that, we're going to clean up one block and make sure that they're doing, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 houses, or even 3 on that block that are in disarray. What do we have to be able to measure that as a city and as a board, so we can make sure that that work is really being done and we can see when that service was completed, especially, this is an issue for me, right? When I drive through the alleys and I see debris that has been sitting in the alley for, like weeks and months. I know it because the grass around it has grown and it's actually been cut. And you can tell it's been cut before, right? But nobody, aside from myself or maybe a neighbor, has called about it. But you have, once again, these departments going through these alleyways and streets every day. I would like to see some type of mechanism set up within the departments to where the foremen are making sure that those requests get, even if it takes them 2 blocks. If you're seeing stuff, say something, because it makes the workload a lot less heavier for other departments, because that debris piles up. Those trees get taller, those weeds get thicker. So the longer we wait with nobody reporting these things, no matter how long it takes for them to report it or get through the day, the longer it takes us as a city to get a hold of these things. One of the biggest things is we have people who see this every day but don't say anything. We cannot expect the residents who have been living around this stuff for, 10 years, 15 years to call in numbers about it, because a lot of people see it as a normality. It's not normal. It's not normal to have vacant buildings falling down and have trash and grass and stuff overgrown all over the place. It's not. But it becomes normal for you, and it becomes something that you sit in your house and say, yeah, it's there, but somebody will get it, because sometimes it does disappear. It might disappear in a month, but that's when I myself or somebody that's a neighbor finally decides to call on it. But we need to be forcing those individuals who are working in the city. I think that needs to be, if it's not a part of that job description, you know, when you see things that need to be done, if this is your route should be clean. People shouldn't be calling in on tires that have been sitting there for months, and you yourself drive through there every single week and pick up trash, you know, and you pick up the dumpsters, or you go out and you cut these lots every other week or every 3 weeks or a month, however long it is, you know, that rotation is, but you come back and you see that same pile of trash and it has not been reported. I mean, that's number one, working backwards. You know, there's no reason why there should be a second request. There's no reason why the neighbors or myself should have to figure out, you know, if this has been called in or not, when we know that these departments are driving right past these things. You know, there shouldn't be any doubt that the word is getting back to the department that needs to pick it up. These are departments that's doing the work. You know, there's no reason why we should have to call on a house next door when forestry just cut the house that's right next door to it, and a foreman was just there, so we have to have them double back and come back, right? Or the same thing with the actual trash when they cut the front of the property and end up not cutting the back of the property. I think those things are, you know, we need to start hitting that at the very bottom level, or we'll continue to see this in 5 to 7 years. You can put out as many initiatives as possible, but if the people that are not doing the work, the people that are doing the work don't understand what the real protocol is, and we're not forcing them on what it is that we need to see done as far as our expectations, then I think we just continue to fail. So that is one thing. If I don't know how you would implement that. Of course, you say they write things down, and even with the tablets being there, they still are going to have to stop and type it in, because they can't drive and do that at the same time. Even if you ask them to take photos, they still have to stop and take photos. I think either we need to add someone riding on these trucks with them so we can get all of this stuff under control, or whatever it is that we need to do to make sure that they're writing these things down, because they're seeing it more than every other person in the city. They see it every other day. They actually have these routes. So if you're on a real route, and this is what you do weekly, that route should be clean. If this is your job, there shouldn't be grass and trash that needs to be picked up. If this is what you do, this is your job for the entire city. And I think on the upper level, that comes down to the way that things are being managed. And once again, there's no disrespect at all. I know within our city, sometimes the jobs, you know, we take on 2 and 3 jobs. So sometimes it's hard for us to focus on just one thing. But I think this is a really big thing in making sure that everything is being documented, so we can go back and say, you know, a month ago, the foreman said that this needed to be picked up, but we had him on a bunch of other jobs. Why wasn't it picked up? You know, we owe our residents excuses. We owe them answers. We owe them, you know, documentation to say, hey, because everything's not going to go to CSB. But once again, these apartments see everything. They pay their money every single time they buy anything within the city. So it's important for us to look at them the same way that they look at us as people who run in the city. We look at them as individuals that's helping run the city, because they're the ones that's spending the money so we can get out here and buy what we need, the equipment that we need. Also with the equipment, like we were down like 20-something tractors this year. Thankful to the mayor's office for getting these extra tractors, but that still, I think, is not going to solve the overgrowth issue. Of course, they'll be able to cut more efficiently, but right now, currently, each ward is getting, 3 cuts a year? Am I correct? Vacant buildings, 3 cuts. So, you know, I have the second geographically largest ward in the city. I should not get 3 cuts when a ward that only has, 10 buildings get 3 cuts. Like, I should have 5 or 10 cuts, because they're going to spend a lot more time within my area because it's geographically larger than they would within an area that has no vacancies at all or a very minimal amount. And those are things I think we need to change also, because it imbalances everything. It makes way for the rain to come 4 and 5 times and for that grass to grow up extra high. I don't think it comes down to only having manpower. It all comes down to the way we're managing everything as a city and the way these departments are looking at the way they break up routes.
If I could comment on just a couple of those.
Yes, sir.
I think one of the biggest things is with our district debris program, we get out there, and if we could throw enough resources to it where we just have that debris team that just runs through these wards. We called it, what was it called? I'm sorry, losing my train of thought here. But we have a team that, takes care of work orders, but then we have a team that doesn't rely on work orders at all. They're just hitting wards and they're running up and down these alleyways. And that's something forestry hadn't been able to do the last couple of years, which I think we're going to be able to do now with the streets department, where that team, once they run into Ward 4, they clean up Ward 4. No one bothers them. They stay on target. And a big thing, I know we go through your ward, Alderman, is those alleys and those fence lines. I've been preaching about fence lines for a long time, and if Kent, his team can come in and remove some of these fence lines where, like you said, if a backyard's grown up, our teams can't get in there and remove the backyard because there's woodies that are 3 or 4 inches in caliper, so there's actually trees growing back there. And now it's not so much we can mow it, we need to come in there and just remove it with large equipment. And those fences, if we come down alleyways and all you see is just brush everywhere, and if we're in between 2 or 3 LRA properties, like Kent was saying earlier, we remove all those fence lines because they're no good. If there's trees growing up in that chain link fence and they're 1 inch, 2 inch caliper, that fence is total. There's no way we can cut that brush out of there and make it look like a decent fence. So we might as well just remove it and hopefully get on the private property homeowners and give them a citation, say, hey, clean up your fence or we're going to remove it. So, but I agree with you, and if we can clean up some of those fence lines and make these properties a little easier to get into, where we can cut them with tractors instead of coming in with weed eaters and cutting around all these fence lines and all these steps and all this other stuff, then it'll make our job a lot easier and we can increase those rotations.
Understood. Thank you. What is the probability of us actually having one full cut on every vacant property in the city in the summertime or within the summer season or the spring season, within a full season?
I'm sorry, what was your question?
The probability of us cutting every vacant property in the city, as far as being able to maintain that, is that possible?
That's what our goal is. Like I said, vacant buildings, we try to make 3 complete rotations. And then vacant properties that don't have any vacant buildings, there's just a vacant lot. So those, we aim for 6 or 7 rotations on those. Okay. And again, if we can increase removing some of that debris, removing some of that stuff we have to weed eat around, and we can get walk-behinds in there and larger equipment in there, we can increase those rotations. And that's hopefully what the debris team can do with the added resources that they're going to have now.
Understood. So I would just like to add, and I'll be finished in a second, I would like to see a little bit more use of equitable time, not equal time, of course. You have to make things, but real equitable time for these departments. We know that the wards that have geographically larger spaces, because of the amount of vacancies they have, need a heck of a lot more work. And it's not to take any services away from the other side of the city, but when you drive through one side and it looks bad, you remember that when you get to the other side, and you just fly through the city and never even take the time to really get to appreciate its beauty, because you're just trying to get out of what looks like it's in disarray. And you all have every ability to be able to change the way this city looks. And of course, we all also have that ability with tearing down some of these vacant buildings that exist also. But as far as making them look as good as they can possibly look, your departments have the ability to actually do that. And I think we need to focus on how we can make things look a little bit more different and spend more time in the areas that absolutely need it, and have a real plan that we can sit down and look at, opposed to, and I see the rotation schedule, but once again, getting you all in the ward 3 times a season is just, that just really doesn't work. We see how that works out, and that's not on you. Of course, I know that it was like that before you became the commissioner. So But things do have to change, and we have to look at what we need to do to make those significant changes, because I'm hearing it every day. So you only get a piece of what, we actually forward to you and what people feel like talking about. But we need to look at changing some things, and I would like to see it physically written down, so we, even if it is conversations that we all need to have. I don't think there needed to be an ordinance change, but an operational change, the way that I think, and I'm not saying you're running things in a bad way, but we need to push things up and see how we can have more optimal running departments, especially on those sides that really need it. But I appreciate you all. Any questions?
You're welcome. Equity, we do, so a ward that has 3 times as many vacancies as another ward that only has, maybe they have 100 vacancies, and another ward may have 300 vacancies. We're going to spend 3 times as much time in that one ward. So we're treating the whole city as the same. Awesome. So when I say 3 rotations, we're not going to Ward 13 and doing 6 rotations there. We're treating we run through the whole city, and then once we're complete with all 28 wards, then we'll start over and do it again. But
Right. I understand, but
I get it.
you get what I'm saying, though. Yeah, because if everything was able to be hit within the time that they were supposed to be, we wouldn't even be having this conversation about grass, because sometimes it's, as you know, it's 6 feet, 7 feet. No matter what type of grass it is, if it takes 2 or 3 weeks for us to hit it and it's 6 to 7 feet, there's something that we need to look at. So we're not talking about the same thing a year from now when saying this type of grass is known to do this. What are we going to do about it so we can make sure that it's not doing it next year or the year after, whether we need to weed eat it, whether they need to come in with a bulldozer and completely clear it out and spread some other type of grass that chokes that grass out. Let's not be talking about this 2 or 3 years from now, because these are issues that are really physical and things that can be ironed out as long as we plan well. I don't want to take up too much time, but I do appreciate you all. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Alan, the alderman from the 3rd brought a good concern up, and I wasn't sure if I heard a response to it. But what I heard him say is force will come out or a department will come out and do a service, and they'll see something there, and it'll be there for months. I mean, certainly that happens in my ward. I'm thinking about the 5700 block of Maffitt. So forestry comes out, they cut the grass, they just cut around debris, big chunks of concrete, logs, whatever it may be, and they do it the whole season.
Right.
And debris is never picked up unless the alderman calls, which I know it frustrates me, because that's not my job to drive the ward every day looking for issues. So I'm hoping that this system is going to be made better. So what happens when this guy on the tractor sees all this stuff in his way or her way? How's it reported?
That is reported. It's on their daily, and then also they'll call it in to the office, so we'll radio it in. So this morning, it was when I was driving down here, somebody radioed in a certain address and said, hey, this is the 2nd time we've came to this address. This debris is still sitting here. Could you please let streets know so we can get that picked up? So the teams that went out and cut the grass, they're going to cut around the debris. Even if when it was with forestry, the debris team was a separate unit. It's not like the guys using weed eaters had those big loaders.
Sure.
So, and again, I can only hope that we were throwing more resources at it, so we're going to be a lot more quicker on our response to pick that debris up.
So is this a new process where the guy on the tractor is going to call in, or is this something that should have been happening for years?
No, it should be the same process. It should be. And I'm going to reiterate with my team to make sure we look at everything up and down, the block. But this should have been reported as soon as that staff was there that, hey, there's some tires back here. We just cut this property. It needs to be picked up.
Okay.
The only difference now, we'll report it to our office, and then the office will send an email or send a work order to the street department.
Something else I heard the alderman from the 3rd ward talk about was ownership. And I think if we can get more city employees to have a sense of ownership, no matter where they perform their duties, we will be a much cleaner city. I would suggest that we have some good employees that do well in their particular, in a Zone A, I'm going to make this up and call it, but then you have some that don't do as well in Zone C. And I feel like I'm in Zone C oftentimes because I know there's no reason to have debris the whole summer and into the fall, and it's still there where there's been 3 rotations.
Right.
And I've experienced that. So I'm hopeful, and I want to be hopeful that this new system, which I'm excited about, really works come next spring, because we shouldn't have to look at that every time we drive down the street and do follow-ups about debris being picked up. So I'm really excited about that. And if we can help, you know, mentor, encourage staff to really have ownership in our communities, we would greatly appreciate it.
Okay.
You know, because when stuff just disappears and
Right.
no one made a phone call, it's a beautiful thing.
And, yes, and that's the whole thing. If we could do some preventative maintenance, which we haven't been doing in the last couple of years.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to Alderwoman Martin, who's been very patient.
Thank you very much. I think that the chair and some of my colleagues have brought up some of my concerns, and I also email you all the time with my concerns and suggestions. I just want to hit again on the CSB thing. I mean, just having more options, saying, okay, we've reported this to forestry instead of closing it out. I know that that's in the works. But I also, and then I hope that this new equipment also includes some push mowers, because I've witnessed mowing entire lawns with weed eaters, and that includes the trash getting broken up and thrown everywhere. But besides that, I just want to say that I have noticed a big difference, and I really appreciate it. I've noticed with Sergeant Calabro's program, I've had 1 trash complaint in the last 2 months. I dare even say that because I'll get 5 today. But no, I really have noticed a big difference. I've noticed at neighborhood meetings, people are much happier. So kudos for you all for helping. And I also think the Vacancy Collaborative is going to make huge strides. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Alderwoman Middlebrook.
No questions.
Oh, my. Okay. You must be tired.
No, every question I had has been asked.
Okay, I want to make sure you have equal time. I want to make sure that forestry and streets feel appreciated. This is certainly not an opportunity to beat up on you guys. It's an opportunity to share from frustrations, some concerns, and hear about how you're going to make it better. So please, you know, don't think that we're just trying to put you out there and throw you under the bus and do all that kind of stuff, because every day is a work in progress.
Correct. Yeah, we're always looking to tweak our operations and be more efficient.
Okay, so thank you. And we're going to now have Sergeant Calabro come up and kind of talk to us about how what the Street Department and Forestry dovetails into how they help make the city better.
You want to
Good morning, how are you?
Good. So go ahead and, again, just tell everybody who you are and what you do for the city.
I'm Sergeant Joseph Calabro. I'm assigned to the Intelligence Division of the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department. I am detached to the Problem Nuisance Behavior Unit, and specifically the Trash Task Force Commander. Before I get started, though, I would like to say to the panel here, to the alderpersons, I don't know who was responsible for assisting us in getting the Trash Task Force up and running again, but as soon as I go over some of these statistics here, I certainly want to send kudos to whoever was responsible for that. A really big deal. And you've cut down the number of calls to the districts for trash-related issues and dumping-related issues, and the stats themselves will speak for themselves in a minute here. But thank you to whoever that was.
A handout or anything?
But yes.
You do?
Yes.
Okay, you can go ahead and give that to the clerk.
There's one. There's 2. And there's 3. So what I'd like to do is to compare January 25th to the current date of 2017 to 2018. The Trash Task Force investigated and closed in 2017 446 service requests. In 2018, the Trash Task Force has closed out 1,955 service requests. The number of summonses written in 2017 was 100. The number of summonses in 2018 thus far is 237. The non-Trash Task Force cases, fines, and court costs last year in the district was 4. This year it is 6. Last year was about $500 in fines. This year it's $1,000. Basically what that's saying is if you were to remove the Trash Task Force, the number of calls and number of clearances for dumping-related cases would drop down to about 6 versus the 1,955. The rewards. Last year, they gave out $300 and $100 rewards. As you know, we asked citizens to contact CSB, and if their information leads to prosecution, they can be eligible for a $100 reward. This year, we have given out $3,600 in rewards. That's 36 persons. The reason for that is, in addition to going to neighborhood meetings and explaining to people the process and how to contact the Trash Task Force through the Citizen Service Bureau, at neighborhood meetings, through the newspaper that has come out and the Post-Dispatch, the various news stations and radio stations. We've gotten that information out at the beginning back in February and March. In addition to that, we streamlined the process. In the past, if someone wanted to be eligible for a reward for the Trash Task Force, the citizen had to contact the CSB. Once they contacted CSB, CSB would look up and try to find out whether or not the case was adjudicated, meaning it was closed out. They would have to contact back to the commander of the Trash Task Force, who would look it up in the computer system, contact back to the CSB, who would then contact the NSO supervisor, who would then contact the NIS in the field, who would contact the resident, who would then contact back to the Citizen Service Bureau, who would contact us. And in the end, eventually forestry would be able to cut the check. We've streamlined all that because now we send a spreadsheet from myself over to the city councilor's office. When those cases are adjudicated and they are marked on the spreadsheet, we track the case from the beginning to the end. Once that case is adjudicated and marked on the spreadsheet, I simply look at that. Another person within our department verifies that as they pull up the report. That information is then sent back over to forestry and the check is cut. The difference is the turnaround time is about a week to a week and a half. In the past, I think people might have gotten frustrated and not seen the rewards. I don't know that for sure because I wasn't around in the program in 2017, but I will say I hope people continue to call CSB and report the incidents. One thing I wanted to note was the number of adjudications. I'm not quite sure how many they did in 2017, but we've had 68 so far this year alone. The number of fines, less the court costs, is $30,800. And as you know, when it comes to the fines, half of that monies is returned back into the Trash Task Force to be returned back out for reward. So it helps heal itself as far as the account itself. Self-sustaining, I guess is the word I'm looking for. The number of community service hours for 2018 is 800. 800 hours that violators have had to go and clean up the alleyways and whatnot. The number of cameras back in 2017 was 6. Currently, we have 106 cameras out there, and in next year, in spring and summer, we'll have 196 cameras deployed. In 2017 and 2018, we installed the camera systems in the alleyways, and we also introduced tablets, which streamlined the way that the information was downloaded for the officers. In the past, they would have to sit by a camera and wait for 2 hours for the information to be downloaded to the tablet to review thousands of photographs, because that's what they take. That's not needed anymore. They're directly downloaded to the tablets via the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. Next year, we'll be retrofitting the camera systems to take them to the next level. Currently, they are battery operated, and about every 4 to 6 months, the batteries need to be replaced. We'll be retrofitting those with solar panels so that the camera systems can stay out in the field, and therefore we will not have to take them down from the poles to work on them, therefore cutting down the time that they can take the photographs. So that's what the project will be next year, along with those cameras. One thing I wanted to point out was a particular case when it deals with dumping and tires. As we all know, dumping of tires is a big deal in the city of St. Louis. And I'll give you an example, without mentioning any names, of a situation. The dealer, for example, charges $5 for tire disposal. The contractor who comes along receives $2 to pick up and dispose per tire. So that's approximately, they pick up approximately 200 tires per box truck, which is $400. If he sells the tires, once he goes through those, for ones that have decent amount of treads, for $20 each, that's 20 times the 200 is $4,000, correct? So in the end, the contractor rents a box truck for $19.99 a day, and he stands to make approximately $4,400. And the reason we know this process, because we ended up arresting an individual up on Church Street. He explained this to us. We caught him in the act of dumping several tires with a rented truck. He was so arrogant about it that he not only admitted to obviously doing that because we caught him in the act, but he also admitted to the pile that was just north of where he was standing. So he was also charged with that as well. But he explained this process to us, and it's interesting from an intelligence standpoint because he's basically telling us that if he's charged $500, found guilty and charged $500, in this case maybe $1,000 because of 2 cases, he stands to make $8,800 off those 2 box trucks filled with tires. So I guess what I'm saying is perhaps we might want to consider more stringent penalties when it comes to persons who dump large quantities of tires, for example. Not the person just the 1 tire or 2, but we're talking these large amounts. They, like I said, they rent these box trucks as they fill them up. They're not disposing of them properly at the end of the day, and they're making money off of it. Everyone's actually making money off the dealership, making money off of it, and the violators making a lot of money off of it. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. A lot of times we're asked, how are the cameras deployed? In the past, the cameras were deployed in more of a shotgun approach, where we'd receive phone calls and they would move the cameras around on a day-to-day basis. That has gone away. What we do now is we deploy the cameras based on hotspot policing. When persons call the Citizen Service Bureau, as the map that's indicated in front of you here with the dots on it, those black dots represent the cases that have been closed for the Trash Task Force. This type of information, by the way, and the other information are where the cameras are located. The camera locations are confidential, are not shared with anyone. But what you'll see on this map is the green triangles on there indicate where the current cameras are, and the red ones indicate where the cameras have been shifted from. The nice thing about it is when I came here the first time, I think it was back in February, I said we would use the hotspot policing. So that when a citizen calls in and we receive a large number of calls for service for the Trash Task Force, that is documented in CityWorks. In the past, I don't think they use CityWorks quite the way that I do. It has a lot of information, a lot of data in there. So we really do use it to the nth degree to extract the information. So like I said, we put those cameras where they belong rather than just shotgunning them out there. So if there's any questions to that, I think it's much more efficient. The other thing is, I said back in February, I would hold accountable the Trash Task Force officers. Each of those officers that work document their hours and locations and what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. That information is entered into the computer system and it is tracked. It is also cross-checked by an administrator within our office themselves, including their hours, where they're working in their hours. So there's definitely a sense of accountability there. They're also very passionate about the job that they do, much like myself. We feel like we're making a difference in the city of St. Louis, and we would certainly like to thank Forestry and the Refuge Division for all their help and their crews. And we'd like to thank this panel for allowing me to speak here today.
All right, good information. Let's go ahead and hear first from the committee. Alderman Murphy.
Thank you very much, and I think everyone has noticed an improvement everywhere. When a camera's put up, how long is a camera there to see if something happens again or whatever?
How long is it at a location?
How long is it at a, and then if nothing happens? I guess what I'm trying to say is, are people aware that you're putting up these cameras and then going to the next alley, so to speak, waiting for that one to get moved or something?
Right. So what happens is if we put the cameras up and we find that a person, for example, may decide to dump behind the camera, we'll put another camera to watch that location behind them. So we,
'Cause it
so
is a
they're
game,
basically watching. Yeah, it's basically
I
a
know,
little bit of a shell game, but
Yes.
that's okay. But while they're doing that, they're still getting caught and photographed on the cameras themselves. So, so that's why there's no exact amount of time that the camera's put in any one location. So it really depends. If it's continuously pulling data and we're able to issue summonses, that camera will just stay in that location as long as it takes until eventually they stop doing it. So.
Very, very good, thank you.
Yeah. Also, if I might note, one thing I didn't mention was the number of violators. This is really an important stat here. So our leads come from various things: witnesses, the trash task force on view when they're driving the alleyways, the officers, and the cameras themselves. If you look at those numbers, 104 cases have come in and summons have been issued because of witnesses. 95 because of on view, the trash task force officers driving around the alleyways, and 77 with the cameras. The reason I keep track of this is because we want to see, are the witnesses really making a difference? And the answer speaks for itself, is yes.
Yeah.
So we can't say enough that they need to continue to call that number, that 622-4800.
Yeah.
The other thing is, as far as the violators, you know, we have violators that come as far as Alton, Belleville, Bonne Terre, Cedar Hill, Missouri, Fenton, Florissant, Hillsborough, St. Louis County, Bethalto, Berkeley, Ferguson, U-City, Ellis Grove, Illinois, Imperial, and Bourbon, Missouri, to come into our city to dump. So we track that as well. As you can tell, I like to keep stats.
Right.
And, you know, so in the past it was, well, it's only the city of St. Louis residents doing the dumping. So we know that that's not necessarily true. So I just wanted to pass that information on to you.
But, and I can personally speak to that. I caught someone that actually lived in Afton. I took a picture of the thing, and when I think it was Officer Wilson, I guess I can say his name, went out there, the gentleman did not have any trash service at all, which meant he was doing this on a regular basis, just dumping, and he just happened to get me, and I just got his number, and we, you know, and he even threatened me. He said, I know where you live. And I said, well, I'm going to know where you live in about 2 minutes. And we got him, you know, so that was nice. But anyway, I have a super reporter in my ward, I believe, that has gotten quite a few of these rewards. I think that's what he does.
Oh, yeah, actually, yeah, 11 of them.
Yes,
Exact,
yes.
yeah.
So it does work, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Alderwoman Boyd.
No questions.
Okay. Alderman Bosley.
I certainly appreciate you because, you know, it is most certainly needed. We got dumping all over the place, so thank you for what you do and making a difference. I do have a question about the cameras. How much do you know currently how much you are paying for them?
The cameras themselves that we use there's two different types, but one of them is about $143 a piece. The more sophisticated one runs about $7,000 a piece. We obviously have a lot less of the $7,000 one versus the I think it's $146 one, exactly a piece. But they do both take excellent photographs. They serve different purposes. One has excellent night photography, excellent infrared, and it also has audible alerts. which we use in some of the neighborhoods. Basically, it says you've entered an unauthorized restricted area, dumping is not allowed in here, violators will be prosecuted. And it blasts that out via motion. So it definitely gets their attention, because we'll get the phone calls back from the neighborhood residents. What in the world's going on? Is it an air raid, or what's going, what the deal is? But we explain it to them, and then they're very appreciative of that, so.
So is that with the $7,000 camera?
Yes.
Okay.
Much more sophisticated, yes.
Absolutely. What do you predict you'll be paying for the new ones with solar?
Well, the solar ones, like I said, they're still $146, and then we retrofit them with solar panels, the batteries, and the regulators on them. So it costs approximately $300 to put that on there. So when you add the $300 to the $346, that's $646. It's a heck of a lot still cheaper than the current ones, and that's the difference. Those $8,000 ones have solar panels on them already. So we've done it, we're able to do this much more efficiently with what we're going to do. So we'll be retrofitting those cameras that are up, including the new ones.
So the ones we have now that aren't $6,000, do we catch more people dumping with the $143 camera or the more expensive one?
Well, since we only have 6 of the more expensive ones, we catch more of the ones that are less expensive.
Yeah,
yes, definitely.
And it's nice and clear,
They're
clarity.
Yeah, they do a great job too.
Reason I'm asking though, because we got you on record saying that these are good cameras to have. I myself think that the city can sometimes pay an extensive amount for services and things, and we necessarily don't have to pay some amounts that we do. I want to put a camera in like every one of my alleys, seriously, and kind of work on a plan to do so. But I know there will be pushback from, different places at this point because we're working on particular initiatives. But since they work and they are clear, I would like to buy a few hundred of those and give you all a hell of a lot more work.
Yeah.
Because we got it. It'd be nice if I think we could completely cut it out if people knew that they were all over the place. So I do appreciate that, and appreciate you saying you think the cameras work, and they work very efficiently.
Yeah, and thank you, like I said, to all of you, whoever was responsible for getting this up and running. So.
Thank you. I will keep asking questions if you want me to. All right. So, what is your protocol usually when a resident? So, let's say, for instance, a resident calls me and they say, "Hey, Alderman Bosley, there's a person dumping in my alley, right now. Could we call someone from the trash task force and get them out there, like immediately?" Is that?
Yeah, in some cases, like we'll get calls from the NISs that reach out to our trash task force officers directly. So if they happen to be working that particular time, they'll go straight to it. We had one last night that was exactly like that. So we don't share the phone number to the individual citizens because it would be overwhelming when the officer was off. He would be getting all kinds. So we narrowed it down. The citizens, if they want to, they can contact the NIS. The NIS will then just lets us know, or the alderperson, and then they let us know, and then we'll, if it's actively going on, then we'll go out there and investigate it. Yes, absolutely.
Do you know how many hours of community service each individual got?
They get 40 hours of community service, and usually the fine is about $500 per charge. So it's $500 plus $50.50 for court costs.
Do you think 40 hours of community service is enough?
I think for some of the cases, yes, but not for those chronic dumpers who dump the tires. I think it needs to be much more serious for them. Not just the fine, but I think the community service hours need to go up so they can, or possibly even in their cases, mandatory, some sort of jail time or something, because those are the extreme. And they're not dumping just, like I said, 1 or 2 tires. They're dropping box loads of tires, 200, 250 tires. And I don't know from the refuge division or whatnot, but I can imagine the amount of weight and equipment it takes to clean up those tires and man hours. It's got to be just astronomical.
I would think so also.
Okay, thank you, Alderman Bosley.
No problem.
Alderman Martin.
No questions. I just can tell it's really working, and I appreciate all your efforts.
Yeah. I certainly appreciate all your efforts. I feel your enthusiasm. You guys doing a great job. I just have a few questions. Who manages the community service workers? When they have to do community service hours, who manages the individual performing the community service?
An officer within, there's one north and I believe one south, and they go out and those are handed down by the courts, and then they make sure that they complete the community service hours, and they get a certificate then at the end of it showing that they've been completed.
So can they on their own go out and provide? Okay, so how do
Have to be supervised.
So how do we as aldermen know that there's someone out there who need to do community service?
Contact them. Julie's contact.
For example, if I had a project, a cleanup project, and I knew that there was 3 people needing community, I could call somebody and say, hey, look, you have anybody need to do community service hours? We have this special project.
Right, and you would like them because you have maybe a large amount of littering in your particular alleyways, and you would like to talk to those, let's say those 2 officers that are working that and say, hey, I got a problem in this area, this neighborhood. Can I utilize them the next time you've got persons that have been sentenced to community service? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, exactly.
So I would just say we just need to share the contact number with those 2 individuals, one north and one south
Okay,
with you.
so if you can email us, that'd be great, because I certainly could use some community service workers from time to time.
And no problem.
So email the whole committee.
Yes, sir.
I'm kind of curious about one citation for a bunch of tires. I thought we could actually cite them for each tire, so they get a. I want to go back and research that, because you're absolutely right. If someone dumped 400 tires, or even 100 tires, just a $500 fine is certainly not enough. And I'm curious as to, do we have a right to seize their vehicle like we do with drug dealers?
I have not, since the city charge, I haven't seen anything like that, so.
Okay. I think we should start seizing their vehicles for doing that. That's a big statement right there.
And,
So-
and also, sir, those cases that involve those box trucks with those tires, for example, and I won't mention the stores that they rent maybe the trucks from for $19.99, but it takes a lot of man hours from the Trash Task Force investigator to get subpoenas, to subpoena that information, the driver information and everything like that. So it's quite a substantial amount of time that we put into it to actually catch the person. So other than catching them on view, but you know what I'm saying. So it definitely would be helpful to increase the fines. And
Okay. And so you kind of was wondering who to thank for the Trash Task Force.
Yes.
I'm reminded of when I think it was Todd Walterman was pressuring me to increase the trash fee by $3. And I wasn't happy and excited about that. But part of our compromise was that we have a trash task force, and that we make sure that there's enough revenue there to pay for the staff and additional cameras on an annual basis. So with the support of this committee, you know, you're there and you're doing a great job. And I like to say the taxpayer is definitely getting their money's worth out of this. And I can certainly appreciate the fact that we can document that. I mean, $30,000 in fines is huge, but what's more impressive is $3,600 given out for rewards. You know, oftentimes people would say, you know, I don't want to call, or, you know, I'm afraid to call it. They don't want to be a witness, but this shows that it's working. It's money well spent. I appreciate the job you guys are doing. Keep it up. Let this committee know if there's additional resources that you need. I don't care what the administration say. We're going to work to get it to you.
Okay.
All right.
All
Thank
right.
you so much.
Thank you for your time.
All right. All right. It's been a long morning, I know, and there's a real important bill that we have to get to. I appreciate everybody's patience. We didn't expect to go 2 hours, but it was well worth the wait for our citizens of the city of St. Louis. And we're going to now hear Board Bill 173, sponsored by Alderman Oldenburg.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning.
Members of the committee. I know there's probably a few people that ducked across the hall, Alderman, just procedurally. I mean, I will be, just a short circuit, I will be asking for a vote out of committee today, so we might have to just logistically
We have a
grab.
quorum. I mean, just go ahead.
You got it, sir.
We'll
Thank
make
you.
sure that we do things decent and in order.
I appreciate the housekeeping up first, Alderman, I do. So Board Bill 173, Committee Substitute, this is under the umbrella of the Smart City Initiative that I know a lot of people are familiar with on this committee, and it intersects directly with the infrastructure improvements that are going to be necessary, so we are a more powerful network of users in the city, which we hope will be able to harness and bring better quality of service and city services to our constituents. Fifth generation technology is coming. I think we all know that, and more powerful networks are coming to St. Louis, which I think we all argue is a good thing, but it's important that we prepare our infrastructure for these technology changes, and I know the ones that also will be coming, the technology of tomorrow. So it's important that we establish a proper procedure and application process for the telecommunication providers who will be utilizing the rights of way and the infrastructure that is owned by the city, and making sure that those improvements can handle the technology and are also a city benefit that exists and lives in our rights of way. So the highlights of Board Bill 173 Committee Substitute that is before you effectively establishes a procedure and application process so that telecommunication providers and businesses can efficiently and very effectively swap out this technology and make sure that the infrastructure is there to support it, whether they need to enhance it or provide new infrastructure to harness and equip this technology. So the city will post what are the requirements of the application. And we are working, just so everyone knows, we are working procedurally within the confines of what is a state law, House Bill 1991, that established an act to say, here's a baseline and an outline, a skeleton sort of outline, if you will, sketch of the procedures and application processes that municipalities need to stay within. So particularly what are the sizes of this equipment that's going to be, what are the costs of the permitting, the application processes, what they can be, that lives within this document. And we obviously want to acquiesce to the timelines. It also laid out timelines. We sort of have 15 days to review the application, let the applicant know that we have all the information, and then within another 45 days, we have to make a determination whether to process, approve, and or deny, rather, I should say, the application. So that obviously is going to put some strain on our city departments to make sure that we aren't in Wild West fashion approving things that are ultimately going to be harmful or impactful to the public rights of way, which the people of the city of St. Louis own. So I think it's important to make sure we stay within the confines of that law. And this board bill, from conversations I've had with the city councilor's office, does squarely fit within House Bill 1991. And we obviously want to make sure that we meet a deadline, a larger looming deadline that the state put on us, which is we have to have this in place by the end of the year. There may be some flexibility there, but we would like to proceed. I think that, under the Smart Cities Initiative banner, as well as making sure this infrastructure is in place and doing the city's business here, we want to make sure that we can acquiesce to that deadline. I think that's important for lots of reasons, because I think the anticipation is we could be seeing 50, 80, maybe to 100 of these applications a week, and we need to make sure that we have our ducks in a row in terms of approving these applications within the requirements that the state law is putting on us, but also to making sure that we are putting ample and reviewed infrastructure in place. I think everybody at the end of the day wants the same thing. We want this 5th generation wireless improvement coming to our city. But I just want to make sure that at the end of the day, we are looking out in the best interest of the city to make sure they have enough time to review this, that we have the administrative process laid out that is fair and equitable for every applicant. we have heard, you might hear some testimony today, but we have heard from the telecommunication partners that are going to be part of this swap of equipment and this changing of equipment in our rights of way. We've acquiesced to some of the comments and issues that they've raised. I think it's important that you bring in experts, industry experts, when you're writing a bill about something that may impact directly or indirectly those industry experts. So we are having a conversation with them, and I think we'll be continued to have a conversation with those telecommunication providers for sure as this bill gets finalized and as we roll out the application process. I'm being told what's envisioned at the city now is this will be an electronic process whereby these providers who want to make application to change out this technology in our rights of way will be able to apply online to make that efficiently as possible, as it will have to go through a couple different departments to make sure that the engineering is being reviewed properly, that it doesn't interfere with potentially ADA compliant, that it's not as easy as just swapping out the technology on a city-owned utility pole. There might be other necessary work that's needed to even access that pole. And does it disrupt the sidewalk, for example? And will the sidewalk be put back in accordance with, the best practices that streets and traffic like to see? Does it impede traffic, or does it somehow molest a pedestrian path that otherwise wasn't there to begin with? So those are the things that have to happen. So I think the Director of Operations I've had several conversations with, as well as Robert Gaskill, who you're all familiar with, of how the city can best acquiesce to this bill and be a good partner to the telecommunication providers that we know will be submitting these applications in a rapid way coming very soon. So I think that's all I'd have to kind of frame this. I will entertain some questions, as well as I know Robert, our Chief Technology Officer, is here. I'm not sure if anyone from the City Councilor's Office or Law Department is here, but they were going to try to make it. But I can field some of those questions, but may need to defer to follow-ups if there are specific legal questions to this document from you all or anyone else here today.
Okay, I was expecting someone from the City Council's officer as well. I was wondering if Jay, could you see if we can get somebody here?
Thank you, Jay.
Okay. Did Robert want to add anything to what you had to say?
Well, let's find out. Absolutely. Robert, do you have anything you want to add at the moment, or just maybe field technical questions as they come?
Robert.
Okay.
What do you say?
He's just ready for questions.
Okay.
He doesn't have anything to add.
All right. Why don't we? Yeah, we'll go ahead and take questions from the committee, and then we'll open it up for public comment.
Perfect.
Okay. Alderwoman Murphy.
I don't have any questions. I'm sorry, I don't have any questions this time. I would like to see what everyone else has to say. If there's anything new, I'm on board, so I want to see. Thank you.
Alderman Boyd.
I have no questions because I know Alderman Brandon Bosley has questions.
Okay. Wonderful.
Because that's his expertise.
So this is probably, so you're trying to say this is exciting news for
It is.
Alderman Bosley? Okay, well, let's see what he has to say, Alderman Bosley.
Oh, man, you kind of put me up there. It's not going to be as interesting as it usually is. So for me, kind of reading through it, got a chance to read it yesterday on what was sent. And I believe, if I remember correctly, reading it, the AT&T is, then they send out didn't they send out information on email saying whether or not they supported the board bill?
We received comments from two telecommunication providers in recent days, both AT&T and Verizon, which they redlined some of this, and that's why there's the committee substitute that's in front of you today, Alderman. We did accept some of those clarification comments. We did accept also some of those definitions as they interpreted them with the state statute and what needs to live in here, but not every single comment or written response from those two carriers was accepted in here.
Is there a particular reason why not?
I think it's because in consultation with the city councilor's office and our chief technology officer, we believe that this does acquiesce to state law, and rather get in the specific legal argument, whether it does or doesn't, because we didn't see a full legal analysis from those providers that provided comment. Some comments were just, this does not comport to state law, and that's obviously open to interpretation. So I think we still, as a part of an ongoing conversation, would accept, and the city council's office would be willing to review a legal opinion if something wants to rise to that level, or a specific legal analysis to some of those comments that we didn't accept. We'd be welcome to entertain a conversation around those.
Understood. Do you know exactly what it is that they asked for that we didn't? And this is just to put on record. In time, you know, people might want to come back and research and
sure
want to know what it is, you know, what the conversation was like behind closed doors. And this is kind of to put things out in the forefront at the beginning of this technological you know, point that we're at, this endeavor that we're embarking on.
Yeah. So I think there were to summarize this, there were three main comments that I think stick out to me that were provided to us that we didn't accept. But to back up, I don't think there were any conversations behind closed doors. Most of it was email, so it's all.
Well, no, not like that.
Yeah, I understand.
Please let me retract that statement if it felt.
Okay.
And I definitely didn't mean like that. As far as just the conversations that the public wouldn't
certainly
necessarily hear, just, you know, like the emails that we talked about. I'm sure everybody hasn't seen that email, so that definitely nothing to that matter. So
I didn't take it that way,
please
but
excuse
just, you know, the colloquialisms are what they are sometimes to different people. So I will let them speak for kind of what their comments were and maybe why they think they're impacted adversely by those or not. I think some of them are around, in here you'll see definitions around stealth concealment. This is to make sure that the city has the authority to require them to the best of their ability and to best practices, try to conceal this equipment so that it's not obnoxious or impugns any other public right-of-way or any other activity that may take place in the public right-of-way. So I think that was a concern. I think another one might have been about the actual application review process, that they want to make an application and that they don't necessarily, they want to make sure that we can be compliant in 15 days to saying whether or not you have everything. And it may be a little bit more of a nuanced conversation to that, because it may be that it's not just a matter of, yes, you can swap out your equipment on the pole, but there may be other make-ready work that's required to make the application complete. There may be equipment that needs to be moved, current equipment that needs to be moved, or another light post that's in the way that may need to be moved. Or sometimes to make sure the technologies are talking to each other, there may not be the necessary fiber infrastructure in place, so another piece of equipment may need to be added, sort of a box. So you see some of those metal boxes along our sidewalks. That may need to be added. I'm not sure exactly, but small cell facilities are defined as the actual antenna that will transmit, and then also any additional equipment that may be needed so that it's talking to the infrastructure as well as talking to our devices and other telecommunication aspects. I think that was an area of concern. Personally, I think those are sort of, we're having vague conversations around some of those specific comments, but those were two, and there was one more, I think, that was important to them, but it might be best that you hear from them directly on what their specific comments or concerns might be.
Understood. Another question, trying to find the
Oh, I'm
page.
sorry, I just remembered. I think the other one that was a comment of one of the carriers was co-location, the ability that maybe multiple devices could be hung on one pole. And I think the city's of the interpretation that one device or one piece of equipment can be hung on a pole, and the other carriers can have their arrangement to share that, rather than having 3 or 4 kind of mini refrigerators hang off one pole at our intersections and in our public rights of way.
So they wanted to have one pole per
Well,
company,
that would be
or-
our request, is that we have one piece of equipment per pole, as opposed to 3 or 4 of the actual antennas or equipment hanging off of one pole.
I 100% agree with that
Yeah.
and can appreciate that.
Certainly.
So here in the application process, I was reading through, I don't remember seeing a place where, and it says that the application, to eventually construct one of these facilities would have to go through BPS, correct?
Correct.
At any given time, does that come back to our city's tech department, like the initiative with Robert? Do you at any time during that application process have any type of conversation with BPS? Are you included in the permit process? Seeing as you are the chief technology officer, I would think it'd be important for you to be a part of that conversation.
This is a public-facing commercial technology, so I am intimately involved with the various city.
Speak up just a little bit, Robert.
So I'm involved with all the city departments, figuring out how we're going to handle, how the city's going to handle the deployment of small wireless facilities. Ultimately, the carriers are going to need to decide where they're going to deploy. So I'm involved with process, but not so much with where they actually end up going, other than making sure that, they comply with our new pole specifications, that they, just as Alderman Oldenburg was saying, they don't, impugn the right-of-way from, meeting ADA requirements and things like that. So because this is a public technology, this is a commercially deployed technology, my vested interest in it, once they start deploying 5G, is in how the city might be able to use it, but I don't really get a vote in where they go. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Do you think it would be not necessarily important to have a vote, but at least be at the table and having some meat and being able to get information when you need it, or just be able to be there, part of that discussion without having to ask about it? Because I find it hard for our departments to communicate, especially when we have new initiatives going on.
Yes.
Everybody is kind of all over the place, and if there isn't any documents that are forcing you to communicate, it kind of, I think it'll breed the same situations that we have now.
And we're working on an automated permitting process, so the carriers can actually come in, submit these permits online, they get routed to the right departments. I'm working with the departments as far as the process engineering around that. I will be keeping track of, the general deployment of where these things are going. I won't have much of a hand in the actual processing of the permits, but I will be keeping an eye on the big picture as far as, when it comes to the deployment of 5G across all the carriers. But then also making sure that the collaboration work is done ahead of time, those processes are defined, and the systems and tools are in place to make sure that that happens.
Understood. I just don't want to get to that point where everything is rolling and we start being left out of the loop.
Absolutely. There are a lot of moving pieces. This ordinance is one of those pieces. There's also going to be ordinances around changes to the zoning code, changes to the building code. We're currently working on new design specifications for our utility poles, because we need to be able to deal with more than just small cell co-locations, but at the end of the day, these are our utility poles. We need to make sure that they can continue to serve their primary function, and there's other types of technology that people have been looking to deploy on these same poles. And, as all of you who have, pursued ward projects for cameras, that there are some very specific, unique challenges associated with deploying technology on our utility poles, either because of the way the power is structured or things like that. And the carriers are going to face those same unique challenges.
Understood. Well, I certainly appreciate it, and I know that it is a lot of work going into this, starting at the very bottom. So I would just, I just want to throw this out there. We all know how, once again, we can start off in one place with the city and end up in a, in a whole nother area. You are leading the city in this new effort. Don't and not to say that you are, but make sure that you're holding on to as much, power, I think, as
Absolutely.
possible.
The deployment of 5G in the city is paramount to a lot of smart city efforts. The technology itself opens doors as far as how we might be able to leverage it to affect the delivery of city services, types of sensors we want to deploy, things like that. So I will not be abdicating a role when it comes to the deployment of 5G throughout the city. But by the same token, the departments understand the level of collaboration that needs to occur. They understand the pressure that they're under. We're doing that work, and then I can just reassure you that we're putting systems in place to make sure that that collaboration does happen. I'm not going to say that we aren't going to learn some things over time. This is new a new concept for the city. I know carriers are, based on what I'm hearing from other cities, carriers are learning things too as they start to deploy these networks. So it's making sure that the process is in place, but making sure that it's also flexible and we can adapt, because we are going to learn things over time. And when it comes to something like this, the analogy is no plan survives first contact. So we know that we're going to need, and we're open to that.
So I appreciate it. Thank you. Certainly appreciate you taking the time to tackle that task also. Thank you, Tom.
Robert, can you step back up again and just, because you didn't get a chance to introduce who you are and what you do for the city of St. Louis. So for the record, we want to make sure people know who you are.
Oh, okay. Robert Gaskell Clemens. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the city of St. Louis.
Okay, thank you. Alderwoman Martin.
No questions. I think that everything's been covered or handled previously. So I think we're moving in the right direction. Thanks.
Okay. I just had just a quick comment, and it's probably more of a housekeeping note. When I look through the bill, there's a redundancy on page 17. Line 15 talks about collation rate. And then on page 18, line 4 says the exact same thing. So we probably should just.
One more time with that, Alderman. Sorry.
Page 17.
Yep.
Line 15, 2, collation rate, and then it talks about the rate of collation. And then the next page over, page 18, line 9 says the same thing. It looks like a duplicate.
I see. Okay.
Okay. Oh, so with that being said, let's go ahead and open up for the public. We have 2 individuals that signed up pro. The first person is Chris Pickle, representing AT&T.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members of the committee, for giving us the opportunity to talk to you today about this. I also want to thank you, Chairman Boyd and Alderman Oldenburg, with all the work you've put into this committee substitute. I know we sent our comments in earlier this week and appreciate the attention and the focus you gave that, and I think your efforts have resulted in a better bill. We do have, some minor remaining questions or comments and suggestions that we'd be happy to talk through with you, and I appreciate Alderman Oldenburg suggesting maybe that, the city councilor's office take a look at this. We'd be happy to have our attorney talk with them as well and work through the final issues. Just to, if I can make a couple general comments. Dr. Gaskell Clemens and Alderman Oldenburg talked about the evolution of 5G and where the technology is going, and that's certainly the long-term play here. But 5G is a little further down the road. The carriers, I can only speak for AT&T, there are more immediate concerns and issues that we have just in terms of our coverage in parts of the city. So what these small cells enable us to do initially is just to provide some densified coverage in areas where our overall network is starting to reach some capacity issues. So think about, Busch Stadium when there's a massive crowd down there. The network is getting taxed heavily with all the videos people are shooting, the pictures they're trying to post, that type of thing. So with these small cells, that enables us to really kind of focus some more intense coverage in those areas so that we can handle the needs of the customers. I was trying to take some quick notes. Alderman Oldenburg talked about some of the concerns that were raised. Concealment was one of the issues that we had raised, just if we could get some further clarification on that. Essentially these are, telephone poles, and it's kind of hard to hide those. Now, there are provisions within HB 1991 when you talk about, say, a historic district, or maybe there's decorative light poles that we would like to try to attach equipment to. We'd be obligated to match that type of architecture within those areas. I know the review process was mentioned, and just in terms of timing, and HB 1991 provides the municipalities 45 days to process these requests. They are correct in that the city would have 15 days to review the initial request and then determine if additional information is needed. That 15 days, technically, we think, is part of that 45-day window, so it's a total of 45 days, not 60, but again, that's something that can be talked about between the authorities. And then, just to be clear, what our equipment looks like, there was a reference made to, kind of refrigeration-type equipment attached to poles. We call these small cells for good reason. Essentially what you're talking about is on a telephone pole. It might be, a transmitter about the size of a large laptop or a pizza box or something, and then there would be one or two antennas at the top of the pole. That's the extent of our equipment, and I can only speak for AT&T. There was, in one of the, in terms of co-location, trying to find a quick provision here, but there was talk about one small wireless facility being allowed on a pole. That is the way it is structured right now. The technology is structured. Because of the technology and the frequencies involved with these small cells, you really can't have multiple carriers on a particular pole. Now, so the bill right now is written as one small wireless facility. In today's day and age, that's accurate, but as we get further down the road, the technology could change a little bit where that these radios and transmitters could work in a closer proximity to each other. So that's just, again, one issue that we raised that we can talk through as well. So, in general, I would just say that the small cell technology, it's exciting for the industry. It's exciting for the residents of St. Louis. We look forward to making it available to all your constituents, and be happy to answer any questions, and certainly would be happy to continue to work with the sponsoring alderman and the legal attorneys.
Okay, so let's open up to the committee. Alderman Alderman Murphy.
Alderman Murphy, I'm telling you. Yes, sir, thank you. So are you telling us that you're in favor of the bill, this committee substitute one?
Yeah, again.
As written?
Yes.
I mean, noting that it's not written in stone, and as things change, like you said, technology and that, of course, we could change too. But we wanted a place to start.
Yeah. And certainly there is a sense of urgency to have an ordinance on the books. And if this is what the committee ends up passing, we can live with it as it is, but continue to work with the alderman and the city councilor to resolve some issues that may need some addressing down the road.
Okay, that seems fair. That's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Okay, Alderman Bosley.
As far as the concerns that you had, you raised two concerns. One of them was the trying to hide the light poles. I believe what's it called? Stealth.
Stealth, right? And concealment.
Yeah, stealth concealment. So, are there places that aren't in Missouri, or places in rural areas, places that we haven't seen where this is a common practice?
The concealment?
Yes, sir.
I would not say it's a common practice. I would say there might be areas where, we have tried, AT&T or maybe another carrier has tried to, conceal it. But keep in mind, those are the those are the taller, what we call macro towers of our network. You know, out in the rural areas, they might be a couple 100 feet high. You know, maybe it's in a forested area, so they're decorated to look like a tree or something like that. But that's not, you know, for this application, what we're talking about are these small cells that are attaching to a telephone pole. And I just, you know, it's kind of hard to envision how you might conceal a telephone pole.
So you wouldn't necessarily own the telephone pole. Your job would just to conceal the device that it's attached to.
Yeah, and they would be housed in equipment, and you know, painted to match the color of the telephone pole or whatever it might be.
Okay, so so in terms of that, I think that would be how you all would try to you know, accommodate that need, and I most certainly understand the need to do so, seeing as we don't know how technology is going to transform over the next 10 to 15 years, and you know, it might be something that every company might want to consider looking at, is how to have you know, nicer looking connections and networks when we have these towers and things that we are building. But I just wanted to know about the concerns. I don't think that you know, hurts business at all. But I do kind of understand your perspective on that, like how do we kind of hide those things. But, you know, if you are doing them in other places, at least making attempts, I think, you know, there's a way that we can figure it out.
I would say the industry is doing it. I'm trying to, you know, rack my brain and think about where we might have done that, AT&T anyway. And I can think of one scenario over in the on the western side of the state, but it really is certainly not a common practice.
Understood.
And again, that's for the larger macro towers.
Not for the smaller ones.
Not the small ones, right?
Okay. Are there any designs that you've seen at all from other providers that might accomplish what it is this I'm sorry, the stealth I've forgotten the name once more. I apologize.
I guess that's what's still a little vague to us is, you know, what the city's intentions behind concealment might be. And that's something that could be resolved in some further discussion.
Understood. So there was another concern, which was the small wireless facility not being large enough to have more than one service provider attach itself to it.
Yeah, and that really is kind of a result of the, you know, the technology itself and you know, competing frequencies when you have equipment operating that close to each other. But again, that's something that as we get further down the road and these things are refined, go through, you know, a couple of years of refinements and revisions, it may be something we can address down the road where you could have multiple small cells on one pole.
Understood. Appreciate it. Just wanted to get that information. It's always good to have clarity and, you know, get the information on both sides. So, you know, as we move forward, there's real transparency between us and the, you know, the residents. I don't have any further questions. I do appreciate you working with the City of St. Louis, though, with this initiative.
Alderman Boyd.
No questions.
Alderman Martin.
No questions.
Chris, just so that I'm clear, what is your interpretation of co-locate?
So co-location for us in this scenario would be going on like an Ameren pole. There's going to be power going to that pole. We want to be, you know, on that pole as well. In the you know, traditional definition of co-location within the industry, and I think a lot of people externally, when they hear that, they think about co-location being multiple providers on one tower. And that does happen on these macro towers I talked about. You know, we could be on there as well as our competitors, Verizon, Sprint, T-Mobile, whomever. But again, with the technology involved in these smaller cells, and because we're trying to provide coverage in a very specific area, the frequencies can really compete with each other.
Okay. Was that definition in the state statute? Is
co-location? I think so.
Okay. so that's a definition that the industry has been using for quite some time. It's not something the city made up.
Right.
Okay. I just want to be clear, because I've just gotten indoctrinated to this recently. So stealth concealment, and I'm just thinking from a practical standpoint, and if I had to advocate for my constituents, I probably wouldn't want some device that looks like it's totally out of whack. I mean, what I heard you say, maybe it looks like a laptop. I wish we had a picture of one.
You know what, I apologize. I have a picture I'll be happy to send the committee.
Okay, but I'm just thinking, I mean, I wouldn't want something that, let's say, looked like a Christmas tree, you know, all year round. And that's just been, you know, outrageous with it. But I think we do have to be sensitive to making sure that people just can't put anything up. Because AT&T has a great brand. And I think if somebody wants to partner with AT&T, what AT&T would say, hey, look, you can do this, but we're not going to let you do that, because then you're going to mess up our brand. And so when I think about our communities, and I think about whether it's a utility pole in the alley or a light standard on a main street, or different type, I think about, I want people to be sensitive as to how we decorate it. For whatever means we want to do that. And so I'm not a lawyer. You know, I always tell people I pretend like I be one, probably win more cases than I lose. But I mean, I will hope that it's not a real impediment to, you know, this bill for AT&T. It does seem to be kind of open for interpretation, but I think the relationship we establish with each other, it probably would be pretty benign.
Yeah, I would agree. And again, we appreciate everything you've done on the bill thus far. You know, can we live with it? We can probably live with it. There are some things we can, you know, certainly continue to discuss and have further conversation about. I would just, you know, suggest that there are still a couple of areas within the city language that, you know, maybe omits parts of the HB 1991 that Alderman Oldenburg mentioned, and I don't know if those were just oversights or if it's something that could be reconsidered. You know, part of it, I think there's on page 4, line 18, there's just some few words that were left out in section 4. Again, there was some language that was left out in that instance on page 15 anyway.
Wait a minute, you say page 4?
You said first, yeah.
Page 4, line 18.
So tell us what was left out, so we're with you on this.
I think it's, the provision reads, the individual has been delegated by the authority, delegated the authority by the federal agency to list properties and determine their eligibility for the National Register. So, you know, just a part of a sentence there. And again, if the city had intended to leave that out, we're looking for some clarification as to why. The other one I was going to reference is on page 15. It's paragraph H, lines 16 and 17. You know, again, this is language from the state statute talking about small wireless facilities, but the state statute's also very clear that the same applies to poles that might be installed to support wireless facilities. So, you know, if there's a permit request down the road involving a pole and a small wireless facility, they'd be treated as one and not separately or individually.
So it looks like on page 15, it talks about the pole starting at 18, and I guess starting at 10. It talks about the small wireless facility. Isn't it within?
There's
2 and 3 subparagraph 2 and 3.
Subparagraph. You're on page 15.
I'm on page 15. When I say sub, that's those like the 2 I's and then the 3 I's. So line 10 has the 2 I's, and applicant shall not be required to provide more than blah blah blah. And 18 is the 3 I's subparagraph, and applicant should.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm with you. I'm actually looking prior to that. Maybe my page numbers
page
are.
15. Am I on the right page?
Well, maybe our page numbers are a little bit differently the way it printed out, but so I'm looking at.
You want? Yeah, you're not on the committee sub.
Oh, is that what you're on?
Right.
Oh, okay, I'm on the original bill.
Yeah.
He's on the committee.
I'm on the committee side, page 15. This would be under paragraph H, lines, well, it's actually lines that we would add back in because it's language from the state statute. So again, this paragraph talks about the co-location with a small wireless facility. There is language which reads, or install a new, modified, or replacement utility pole associated with a small wireless facility. So the state statute covers both the small wireless facility and the pole that might be required.
Okay, so I got you.
And that's,
Okay, thank you.
that's it.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate you.
Next up is Mike McDermott, represent Verizon. Mr. McDermott, welcome to the Board of Aldermen. This is your first rodeo, right?
It is, sir, my first rodeo. I appreciate, Chairman, the opportunity to speak to the committee, members of the committee. Thank you for having me. I'm Michael McDermott, Director of Government Affairs for Verizon. I cover 5 states in the Midwest, including the great state of Missouri. I would like to thank Alderman Oldenburg for introducing this legislation on our behalf. Also, I'd like to thank the Office of Dr. Gaskell Clemens and the legal counsel for their help in pulling this draft together for us to consider today. I won't retread the ground that Mr. Pickle had so eloquently covered today, but I would like to just reinforce a few things that I think are the highlights of the bill and why it's important for the residents of St. Louis. It's an economic development bill, a jobs bill, if you were. It'll spur new technologies that will mean new opportunities for employment. It's an investment bill. It's going to be tens of millions of dollars invested by not only Verizon, but my competitors at the other companies. It'll attract business. The new technology for 5G will open the door for companies to come here and provide services that don't exist today because the technology is so new. And it's going to benefit all residents of St. Louis. It's going to be equitably deployed. We're not going to leave any community out. We want to cover St. Louis wall to wall. So our goal is to bring this technology to all the residents in no manner that would be discriminatory to those who would expect it. So we're not going to cherry pick communities. We're going to deploy it in an equitable fashion. I do want to highlight the letter that our council provided to the committee yesterday, highlighting some of the concerns. I know they were covered by Mr. Pickle and by the committee earlier. But the issue of the one wireless facility per pole, I think it's important to note that 4G, the densification issue that Mr. Pickle talked about, is important to us as well. Our networks are getting slammed because of the heavy data usage by our customers, your residents, your constituents. And that'll allow us to take the pressure off our network today, but as we get ready very soon, I think we may be better poised to deploy 5G than some of our competitors. We want to get rolling on that as soon as possible. So the additional equipment we'll have to put on the pole would be difficult if this one wireless facility per pole was law. The problem with that also is you can't do 2 carriers on the same pole. So AT&T and Verizon could not share a pole because it would interfere with our network. We work on a different technological platform than they do, so we want to make sure that we have the ability to keep our network from being interfered with. And I want to make a point that if we do bring additional equipment on the pole, that it will stay within the confines of what the size of the equipment can be on the pole under the law, both the state law and the city ordinance. So we're not looking to add equipment that would violate the space requirements of the proposed ordinance. And also the stealth issue. Right now, we do have stealth equipment that we could deploy for 4G. And we will work with Dr. Gaskell Clemens' office to talk about that. He had asked us earlier if we would sit down with him to help design and exchange ideas about what these poles will look like. If a pole, and I suspect most, if not all, of St. Louis's poles that are owned by the municipality are in the right-of-way and we want to put an asset on that pole, my guess is that that pole will not be able to sustain the weight of this equipment, and we will be replacing that pole at our cost, no cost to the city. So I think that St. Louis residents will see, not only from Verizon but all of the other carriers, a significant improvement in the number of new poles that will be deployed over the next several years. The issue of stealth for a 5G situation, that's in development right now. So there's no, we're working with our manufacturers to come up with equipment. And as you said, Mr. Chairman, about the power that Verizon has to dictate what that equipment will look like, we have heard from not only St. Louis but other communities about the aesthetics aspect of that, the ability to conceal the equipment as best as possible, and we're trying to come up with the best solutions for that. So for 4G, we can do concealment, and we can work with Dr. Gaskell-Clemens' office to facilitate that for 4G. For 5G, that's a work in progress that will evolve as the technology evolves. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll open up for questions from the committee.
If you have any hard questions, Mr. Pickle will be happy to come back up.
No, you have to ride the bull.
All right, I'm ready, I'm ready.
Okay, Alderwoman Murphy.
Thank you for coming. I think my same question was that of Mr. Pickle. You are okay with this board bill committee substitute as it stands and willing to work with us in the future?
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah, there's, as you know, as writing laws, as you do for a living here, perfect is the enemy of the good.
Exactly.
This is a good bill, not a perfect bill. We recognize that there are some concerns that we've raised to the committee.
Okay.
And we hope at some point that we'd be able to address those. Some, I think, are easy fixes. Others might require a little bit more dialogue. But I think it's better to move forward with what we have now than to delay after the first of the year when the state law would take precedent over the ordinance if there was a lack of an ordinance.
Okay, thank
Yes,
you.
so
Yes, thank you. Yes, I concur that we move forward. Okay, thank you very much.
Alderwoman Boyd.
No questions.
Alderman Bosley.
Thank you for coming. Once again, so with the concerns that you have, it's not about the concealment, right? It's just the concern of having to have multiple carriers on one wireless facility, right?
May I address that? So if you have a street light outside City Hall here and it's only a certain number of feet and it's only able to accommodate a certain amount of equipment, 2 carriers cannot go on that same pole. But luckily, there's 45,000 poles, I think, in St. Louis alone that are owned by the municipality. Dr. Gaskell-Clemens, I think, will have a better idea of the number because I think they've recently gone through an audit of the assets. But our issue is the need for 2 pieces of equipment, one for 4G, which exists today, and the other for 5G, in those areas where we have heavy data usage, like Ballpark Village, and I think Busch Stadium was mentioned earlier, maybe out at the universities or at the zoo, places at Union Station, places where people congregate and use heavy data usage. You can't, so we need enough room on that pole within the confines of what's in the ordinance to be able to add transmitters and receivers for 5G. So it's really just adding another panel below. It has to have a certain number of clearance feet, but below the existing equipment that we would have on there for our next generation network, which is quickly coming, as I mentioned.
Understood. So since we're at the brink of kind of building the city's technological infrastructure up, and I think in smart cities in general, once again, we don't know how things will evolve over the next 5 to 10 years. Your companies and the corporations that work together have, more than the city has in the bank than we have, in our reserves, just on a on a rainy day. So I would think that with all of the different technologies that exist, I'm not 100% sure, but this is a question maybe that you can answer, that there are technologies that exist that would be able to separate those signals and frequencies to be able to give each provider what it is that they needed for their customer base. We see the tall towers all the time, and they have 4 or 5 different antennas on them pointing in 4 or 5 different directions, and I know that different providers pay for space. So what technologies, not what technologies, does the technology not exist right now to be able to put 2 small wireless facilities in close proximity together without having interference and not being able to direct your customers to, that provided service that they pay for? Does that technology exist?
I think that's a great question, and I would need to have some of our engineers to come up and really confuse you with some technological mumbo jumbo that I don't even understand. But a simple answer to that is not that I'm aware, and that each carrier uses different technology. So our 5G solution will be a millimeter wave solution that can only carry a few hundred feet. Another carrier solution is not going to use the millimeter wave spectrum. It's the same spectrum that you use for radio, TV and radio in your car or at home. So the equipment that another carrier could put on that pole could interfere with our millimeter wave technology for 5G, for example. We have to keep that technology separate in order to keep the network from interfering with each other. In fact, there's federal regulations on the issue of radio frequency interference that would basically make it impossible to have 2 pieces of equipment with today's technology to have 2 carriers, competing carriers' equipment on the same pole. So we have to be able to clear that clearance in order to make sure that each of our networks are running to their best capability, but also keeps the competitors from interfering with each other.
So what would you propose? What would you be? What would you say is, or what would be your proposed change in this, so we, could come to an amicable solution to, this particular issue? What would you suggest?
The issue of having 2 carriers on one pole is nothing we can address in this ordinance today or in the near future. Technology is going to have to evolve to a point where that solution solves itself. But I do hear what you're saying. I just, right now, I don't know of any technological solution that would allow for 2 carriers to be on the same pole without interfering with each other.
Understood.
And there's only a finite number of feet on a pole. 30 feet, 40 feet, and you can do 28 cubic feet for the equipment. You're talking about, that's going to be one crowded pole. Talk about a Christmas tree.
Understood, but just like you said, as technology, progresses, things get smaller.
They sure do, yes.
And, a lot more efficient. And I think the board bills need to be set up for the future, not just for right now, because it'll be, 4 or 5 years before everything gets really deployed throughout the city for us to have the real infrastructure. So you all know where technology is going, probably, a little more than I do, because you're very much so in the know of everything and are building these technologies that we utilize. So, it'd be nice, and not to say that you all don't communicate, I'm not sure, but if Verizon and AT&T and any other provider was to come up with that type of, technology, and once again, it's not to say that it doesn't even exist. I'm sure there are things that can block transmissions, and direct transmissions to a particular location that exist. I'm not sure how that looks on a wide scale trying to service thousands of people, but on a small scale, yes, I know it does. So I just looking forward into the future, us having a population of 311,000 people, wanting to get to that point where we have 800,000 or more, in the future, we could possibly have a lot more of these small wireless stations, if you will.
Facilities, yes.
Yeah, facilities, if you will. And I think at that point, the providers will be trying to have more conversations on how do we minimize space and maximize space. So this is that time where everybody's having that conversation. I think we should be looking at, being innovators and how we lead the charge on that, if it doesn't already exist, because it brings it puts St. Louis on the map in a different light at the same time. We got Microsoft here, we got Cortex. There's a lot of different, yes, there is some technological infrastructure that companies are working towards, and I think the more we put our heads together on certain things, the better off we'd be, and the more that we lead the actual, we lead the race in becoming well, the already smart cities that exist, but being a competitor within that realm, which is, I think that is our goal.
Yes, sir. I think cost savings often drive our innovation as well. So if there's a way to do this that enables us and our competitors to save money for doing it that way, I'm sure the technology will catch up. We're changing a city code. We're not changing the state constitution, so we can certainly adapt and scale the legislation in the future to meet any technological advances that are forthcoming. I will say this very carefully, because our competitors are in the room and may be watching on TV, but Verizon, when we did a plan for rolling out 5G nationally, St. Louis was at the top of our list of cities to deploy this. We saw opportunity, we saw a city in need, and we wanted to make that investment here. In exchange for a path of regulatory certainty that we have through the state law and now through this ordinance, that investment that we will make here will make a difference and be able to do sooner rather than later. Any delay is only going to force us to have to find other cities that have the path of regulatory certainty, a streamlined process, an administration that understands the value of what we're proposing. And I think we have all the hallmarks of that here, and we're excited about moving to that next step.
Yeah, we're definitely excited also. Certainly appreciate.
Thank you.
Thank you. No more questions, Mr. Chairman.
Alderman Martin.
No questions. Thank you for coming.
Okay. I like what you had to say. This is an investment bill. This is a jobs bill. But also, listening to you and Chris Pickle with AT&T, this technology certainly is evolving. And this piece of legislation today is a good framework for us to start upon, and we will continue to build upon it. And I would hope that, by the time 8 or 9G come, the little wireless thing you need to put on the opposite side of a cell phone, then we won't have to worry about anything being obtrusive or whatever. But I appreciate you coming. I appreciate you providing your input. I hope you felt that you were heard. The city of St. Louis is certainly in the business of wanting to help businesses and not hurt businesses and help spur growth. So I appreciate you.
Thank you. Well, we see this as a collaborative effort, and we're excited about that collaboration. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you, and members of the committee. Again, I'm very grateful for this opportunity.
Okay. I'm going to ask Robert to come back up real quick and maybe the sponsors. I want to just get some clarity on something. It seems like the service providers are concerned about collating several wireless systems on one pole. Is that a mandate or?
And I appreciate the question, because I would like to actually address quickly why we went down that path. The city is bound by the definition of a small wireless facility as spelled out in HB 1991, the state legislation. It describes a small wireless facility by volume. So it may be, so when we say only one small wireless facility can be placed on a utility pole, that means only 3 cubic feet of antenna, only 9 cubic feet of equipment, only 15 cubic feet of equipment on the ground next to it, because that's the definition we have. Now, within that 9 cubic feet, they could be putting 4G technology in, they could be putting 5G technology in, but what we can't deal with, because the poles won't support it and we can't come up with a new pole specification that would, is 18 cubic feet worth of equipment on the pole. So when you look at how the definition we have to live by of a small wireless facility and the volume, that's why we're saying we can't put more than one on a pole.
Oh, so you're saying we can't, and maybe I misunderstood. And Chris and Mr. McDermott, if y'all can come back up, because I want to be clear, because maybe I misunderstood you guys. I thought you guys had a concern about like 3 carriers on one pole. Is that not what your concern was?
Yeah, that is a concern.
But Robert is saying we don't want that.
That's where the dialogue needs to be had. We appreciate that. I'm glad he said that, actually. But the way it's written is the reason the law was initiated in Jeff City and the ordinance was drafted to confine with the law.
You can move closer to the mic if you. I'm sorry.
the purpose behind the state law and now this ordinance is to provide the clarity that we need. This provision of one wireless facility per pole only is an introduction of ambiguity or gray area, where what Dr. Gaskell Clements' point is, he says that he's not trying to infringe on our ability to put additional equipment as long as it meets the definitional confines of the dimensions of what's allowed on the pole. I'm probably saying too much too fast, but the way the ordinance is written right now, that one wireless facility would only limit us to 4G or 5G, not both, even if the equipment is within the confines of what's allowed by the law.
Okay, but from the same carrier. So
From the
that's what
same
you
carrier,
guys-
yes.
Is that what you're saying as well?
That's-
Okay,
yeah.
so let's bring the city council up here as well, and so he and Robert on the same sheet of music to make, so we get certainty and clarity on this. And just remind us who you are and what you do for the city.
Mark Lawson. I'm the attorney manager over special projects for the city councilor's office.
Okay, so Robert, restate what you said about.
What I said is the reason we went with one small wireless facility is we're sticking to the state's definition, which defines a small wireless facility by volume. It doesn't define it as whether or not it's 4G, 5G, or what have you. It defines it by volume.
Okay.
And what we're saying is based on the volumes in the definition of a small wireless facility, we can't allow more than one small wireless facility on a pole. Okay. It does not mean that that small wireless facility can't contain 4G and 5G technology. What we're saying is we can only support 9 cubic feet of space on a pole. What you put in it, we're not telling you what you have to put in that 9 cubic feet. We can do 9, we can't do 18.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. If there was a stronger pole, could...
We are currently working on new pole specifications, and I was going to bring this up when we talked about stealth concealment. We're currently working on new pole specifications where we can provide that 9 cubic feet of space towards the base of the pole. We can provide mounting positions on the tops of the poles. So we're trying to figure out how we can design a modular pole that can support not only small wireless facilities, but other types of technology they're going to need to deploy on it, and make sure that the poles can continue to...
Okay.
and make sure the poles can continue to serve their primary purpose.
Mr. Chairman, may I?
Yes.
I think this is probably remedied by removing the reference to one wireless facility because, as Dr. Gaskell Clements has pointed out, we're limited by the law as to how much space we can use on a pole. And if it's a matter of what that equipment is and what that equipment is used for, you don't have to limit it to one carrier or one facility because another wireless provider couldn't come on that pole. We would be beyond the confines of what's allowed by the dimensions that are set forth in the ordinance.
Okay. I just want to get clarification, you know, as what we're talking about, but if there's a need in the future for us to move beyond this, and what I heard Robert say is working on different pole specifications so that we can accommodate more in the future, I just want to be clear, you know, that...
In the future, if the definition of our position is, in the future, if the definition of a small wireless...
I'm getting old. For some reason, I can't hear you.
Okay. Yeah, our position is if in future the definition of a small wireless facility gets smaller, then, you know, we can revisit whether or not we would allow more than one small wireless facility on a pole. We are interested in providing the clarity to say that we don't mean whether or not the small wireless facility is 4G or 5G. We are talking about the volumetric definition.
Okay, got it. Would you like to put the committee substitute before us?
Would.
Okay. Oops, can you go? Yeah.
I would just
So
add,
while they're going to get members of the committee, would you just kind of walk through the committee substitute?
Sure.
The changes?
Yep.
And then, no, we can't do that. Okay. Because we should really have it before us as we talk through it.
Certainly.
We're not doing any of these, are we, today?
No. think this is a great opportunity for the city of St. Louis. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, and I will also, summarize while we're waiting for our colleagues that I appreciate the speakers today and their companies. I think they're good corporate stewards in general and always have been to the city. And there's clearly a desire to meet mutual goal here. So I think, to echo, I think it is in the city's best interest in this committee to sort of pass this out and get going on the deadline. And sincerely, I mean that, and I know that the colleagues on this committee will also take it serious that if we find this application process isn't working or it's causing a lot of pinch points, ordinances can be amended.
Okay, yeah. Okay. We're almost there. Unfortunately, this committee hearing has gone on much longer than we anticipated. I think a lot of my colleagues kind of need a potty break.
Because you all like talking about trash so much, just so you know.
Thank you,
You know,
Tom.
talking trash is one of the things we really like to do on this committee. We are a trash
You do
talking
excel in
committee.
that, Alderman.
Okay. I'm going to move that we put Board Bill 173 committee substitute before the committee.
Second.
It's been moved and second. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Moore. Alderwoman Murphy.
Aye.
Alderman Coder. Alderwoman Boyd.
Aye.
Alderman Bosley. Alderwoman Martin.
Aye.
Alderwoman Middlebrook.
Aye.
Chairman Boyd.
Aye.
6 aye votes.
Okay, so what's before us is Board Bill 173 committee substitute sponsored by Alderman Oldenburg. And Alderman, if you would just kind of walk us through swiftly of the changes.
Certainly.
know
I
we've
think,
talked
I
about
hope,
it.
are they not redlined?
Yeah.
They are,
Okay,
yeah.
great.
Yeah.
So I think the committee substitute was brought about and born by, that interaction and that partnership with these carriers to try to put us more squarely in the confines of HB 1991. Everyone spoke today that there is some vagueness around that, and I think the city tried to take authority where we could with some of that vagueness just to make sure our processes can accommodate applicants. So that's, for instance, changing the words construction to co-location. I think that was an important point that all the speakers spoke about. And the most of the other ones were some changes and additions. You will see around on page 6 of 31, starting on line 12, when we talked a little bit about stealth and the integration of stealth concealment, we did add some comments there to make sure that it's not just the support structures, right? The support structures are what they are, but it's actually the equipment that will be put on them is that what's stealth. So I think that was a good clarification comment and a welcomed one at that. The other big ones were just, I think you'll see, let's see here. More stealth concealment on 9 and some clarifications.
Let's stay on page 9 real quick. Go up to
Yep.
line 3. Is something missing?
Let's see, nothing to this chapter limits the authority obtained one or more permits to general applicability that do not apply exclusively to. No, I think that's accurate, and then it goes down to the next headings.
To run on sentence.
All right?
But there's C, then there's
Oh, you're correct. That, I'm going to defer maybe to either the board's attorney there or Mr. Lawson, if that needs to be cleaned up. Should not have. So we're on, Lou, yep, page 9, starting really with 1C, and then it was an added comment, a red line comment that looks to that do not apply exclusively to. Right here.
I think it continues to D.
That probably should just be C.
Okay, so I think, yeah. We'll let us confirm, but we think that D goes away really, and then E becomes D, and it moves on down from there, but.
Okay, that makes sense.
These are Scribner's errors, but they're important that we're walking through them. I appreciate that.
I want to make sure people don't think we're trying to pull a fast one, so that's on the record, we're clear.
I would concur, Alderman, 100%.
Okay.
So I think that other fixes, just on 11, I think there was added reference to the August 28th deadline. That was the original deadline, I think, in the state bill, and then they gave an extension. So there's sort of two dead dates in here. I'm glad that that was brought in for clarification. I think most of the comments do, I think, try to comport us, a little more to HB 1991, which again, I would say is welcome. I think those were the big ones, Alderman. But most are clarifications. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to entertain a motion to pass Board Bill I'm going to make the motion to pass Board Bill 173, committee substitute out of committee with a due pass recommendation.
And I will second.
Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Moore.
Pass.
Alderwoman Murphy.
Aye.
Alderman Coder. Alderwoman Boyd.
Aye.
Alderman Bosley. Alderwoman Martin.
Aye.
Alderwoman Middlebrook.
Aye.
Chairman Boyd.
Aye.
You have 6 yes votes and 1 pass.
No, let's go back to Alderman Moore.
Alderman Moore.
Aye.
That's 7 aye votes.
Okay, Board Bill 173, committee substitute passed out of committee with a due pass recommendation. We're now going to put Board Bill 172, sponsored by Alderwoman Martin, before us. I apologize, Alderwoman Martin. I set all these bills aside.
Oh, it's been a long morning.
And,
We need a pizza.
Just had to wait all this time.
Go ahead, Alderwoman.
All right, thank you. As many of you know, because you've sit on other committees where legislation dealing with this development has gone through, Lions, actually it's an old Lions school in my ward. It is a vacant, distressed albatross in my ward, if you will. Squatters and whatnot, same old story that many of you face. I am working towards development there for market rate apartments. And in the early 90s, the school board actually vacated the alley and put a gym on that alley, but some paperwork wasn't filed. So to the residents' knowledge on that block, the alley is vacated. There is a building sitting there. But this is just cleaning up to go forward with the development for these apartments at the school.
Okay, sounds like a very simple bill. I'm going to do it this way. Is there any member on the committee that wants to ask a question?
No.
I do.
Okay,
Yes, ma'am.
Alderwoman Boyd.
Is it in your ward?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, that's all.
I move that we pass Board Bill 172 out of committee with a due pass recommendation.
I second. There you go.
Thank you.
Is there an objection to previous roll?
No.
Hearing no objection to previous roll, Board Bill 172 comes out of committee with due pass recommendation. Are there any other bills for consideration that people would like the chairman to
Anybody's here
entertain?
Oh, shit. No.
Hearing none, for the second time today, the
Yeah.
Streets, Track, and Refuge Committee is adjourned.